ladies and gentlemen. We have a quorum. We had 22 members of the, 27 members of the committee present, and thank you for the additional council members who attended today. We have 2 members of the public who have signed up for testimony. First, we'll have Ryan Marks from the Whale, Chicago, and Pat Dorr from the Chicago Hospitality Association. So first off, we will hear from Mr. Marks.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, great. First off, thank you for everybody's hard work, and I appreciate your time to listen to me today. I'm calling about the restaurant situation that we're in right now in the hospitality industry, specifically as it starts to get colder. Previous to COVID, I employed over 200 people, and last year we paid over $1 million in sales tax and real estate taxes. This year I employ about 100 post-COVID, and obviously those taxes are going to be substantially less. We're going to lose about 80% of our occupancy once we go in with the current guidelines. So I'm just taking this moment to really ask for help and the situation that we're in, because if winter hits and nothing changes as far as what we're allowed to do, we'll potentially have to close our doors for the winter at least, if not longer. And I just want to say we're operating extremely safe. We're following all the rules. We're social distancing. I promise you we're doing all the right things. I've had 0 cases, knock on wood, at all 3 of my locations. And what I'm finding is when people leave, they're leaving and they're going elsewhere because we closed at 11, whereas before they stayed. And we'd like them to stay. It'd be a win-win. We could support the community with tax dollars and employment, and people could stay in a safe environment, socially distanced, wearing masks, and we'll enforce it. We're constantly handling all the curveballs that are thrown at us since before COVID and all the restrictions that we do have. So I'm just really asking for the help. I know Alderman Riley, thank you so much for the ordinance I know you're proposing. And that would be fantastic. So that's my public comment. Thanks again for all the hard work that y'all do. I know this is a trying time for you all and what y'all are put through. So we thank you for your help.
Thank you, Ryan. We appreciate you coming on today and speaking. And I know you're in the first ward, so hopefully our first ward alderman was able to hear those comments as well. I think he was on the call here. So thank you for coming on today. Next, we have Pat Dorr from the Chicago Hospitality Association. Pat, are you there?
Hello, this is Pat Dorr from the Hospitality Association. Hopefully this is going through.
It is. Go ahead.
I'm calling today or chiming in today specifically on the issue of hospitality taxes, their importance to this budget and the next budget. Our association represents over 200 locally owned bars and restaurants across the city, taverns and restaurants. And it's often unremarked that Chicago has a diverse array of hospitality taxes, many of which are the highest of any comparable major U.S. city. I want to briefly cover how much these taxes generated by all of these thousands of locally owned taverns and restaurants mean to past budgets, and end with a plea for action to keep this revenue stream, critical revenue stream to the city, available in years beyond the next incredibly challenging budget. Among just a few of the hospitality taxes levied by Chicago, the hotel tax, not exactly my association's wheelhouse, ably represented by others, that brought the city $124 million in 2019, down 4% from 2018, but still an amazing number. Those taxes already down 65% year over year through July. Chicago's restaurant tax last year, this is also collected on anywhere with a retail food and a liquor license citywide. It was at the time 0.25% of the sale, $22.375 million. That was a 10.9% increase from the year before, thanks to robust tourism and a great economy. and that organic industry growth was rewarded with the doubling of the restaurant tax in last year's budget. Not to dwell on that, but it is discouraging when you can grow your contribution to the city and just get smacked with another tax increase. Even with a double tax rate and a decent winter before COVID struck, that tax was down 45.7% for 2020 versus the same months last year in 2019. Those numbers are only going to get worse. It will surely give the city less revenue than it did in 2019, even at a doubled rate. Multiple city hall and media commentators have mentioned that they believe that liquor taxes would be way up. Chicago, I must point out, has the highest spirits tax of any major U.S. city, and some of the highest beer and wine taxes, despite us being a national leader in the beer and beverage alcohol industry, with many national companies headquartered here. That tax, even with the alleged increase in stay-at-home consumption, is down just about 1.2% for the year, and that will probably keep dropping, so they'll earn less. Finally,
Go ahead,
I would
Pat,
like
if you
to
want
point
to. Sorry, Pat, go ahead and wrap up as you can.
I'll
No
wrap
worries.
up
Go ahead.
quickly. I would point out that beyond that, the McCormick Place tax, you might almost call it a TIF, took in over $54 million in food and dining taxes last year and $64 million in hotel taxes last season. Easily, Chicago's hospitality industry generates over $2.9 million a day in sales taxes from eating and drinking in a regular economy. You face enormous budget challenges, but in the next few days, you'll hear more from some of your colleagues and all of the industry about relief the hospitality industry needs now to keep that revenue coming in years beyond. It's over $250 million a year in revenue in a normal year, and we need your help to maintain that for future budgets. Thank you very much for your time today, Alderman and Chairman Wagasback.
Thank you, Pat. We appreciate you coming on and always appreciate the information you share with all of our colleagues about the industry. With that, I'm going to have Jenny Bennett step up, and she's going to discuss a few items and go through a little bit of the agenda. Jenny?
Thank you, Chairman Wagasback. Good afternoon, Vice Chairman Hairston and members of the Finance Committee. Today, we are starting the first of two revenue hearings to discuss certain revenues we have been recommended to consider to close part of the budget gap for 2021. As we discuss potential revenue sources for the 2021 budget gap, it's important that we keep in mind that the most powerful and least painful way to address the city's financial challenges is to do everything we can to expedite the recovery of the Chicagoland economy. If we lost $783 million in revenues due to COVID in a single year, returning our economy to pre-COVID levels will go a long way in addressing future gaps. As a result, it's important that we keep our goals set to the post-COVID recovery and not forget that our actions today must support the survival of all parts of our economy, so that engine is available to us by way of restored tax revenue, employment, population, and overall competitiveness of the city of Chicago. We are all in this together, and the more segments of our economy we can preserve and support as we move through COVID, the less painful it will be to work our way back to recovery. In that vein, the city has been working to provide as much stimulus as we can to the broader economy while being mindful of the fact that we must balance our budget. Economic recovery doesn't come just from reopening businesses, but it comes from instilling consumer confidence, which only comes with the assurance that you will be safe from COVID while participating in the economy. In other cities, states, and countries, economic recovery has come faster with a faster COVID recovery. This has been proven in the various ways different cities have responded to COVID, as well as the research done on the subject. Michael Greenstone and Vishan Nigam of the University of Chicago, in a recent study titled "Does Social Distancing Matter?" concluded that 3 months of social distancing could save 1.7 million lives and as much as $8 trillion in spend. As former chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, Austin Goolsbee recently stated in an interview with McKinsey, the countries that prioritized health not only had better health outcomes, they had better economic outcomes too. Here's where the main focus is on the economy. Rather than stopping the disease, we got the disease and it wrecked the economy. So the two go together for better or worse, unquote. As a result of our swift COVID response based in data Chicago has been at the forefront of its response to COVID, which has resulted in the most open economy of any large city in the country. Further, our CARES Act funds have had a stimulative effect in addressing and relieving the needs of the city's residents, but also in helping as many businesses and residents weather the current pandemic so that they are there to power the recovery when it happens. As noted in a recent Bank of America study, the city of Chicago ranks 4th nationally among 22 of the largest US cities for consumer card spend recovery over the course of the last 8 weeks. Additionally, small business recovery in Chicago has exceeded other big cities. Per data from Homebase, a company that provides time clock and scheduling tools to small businesses, the number of hours worked in the Chicago area was down by only 24% in August compared to January, whereas New York City and Los Angeles also saw 40 and 32% decreases respectively in the same time frame. Similarly, the number of locations open in Chicago declined by only 14% compared to 31% in New York and 29% in Los Angeles. We believe that the city's aggressive COVID response, paired with our stimulus efforts, have aided in the strong recovery of the city's economy. The city's efforts to support the economy through the pandemic includes $33 million in CARES Act funds that supported affordable housing as part of the COVID-19 Housing Assistance Grant Program, $10 million that supported mental health investments, $10 million in anti-violence investments, and $100 million in Small Business Resiliency Fund. This is in addition to the investments made in the 2020 budget, including $50 million in increased investments in mental health and anti-violence, among others. As we discuss potential new revenues to address the 2021 shortfall, it's also important to note that only a subset of the city's revenues are subject to change by the Home Rule Authority of the City Council. State authority is required for a number of other revenue sources, which include the state's portion of the sales tax, an income tax, a financial transactions tax, a real estate transfer tax, cannabis, among others. Today, based on your feedback to the Committee on Finance, as well as the Committee on Budget, we will be discussing financial transactions tax, lease transactions tax, gaming revenues, and a head tax. Rather than hear from us, we have organized a panel of experts on city revenue streams, as well as additional speakers on the panel. Before I turn it over to the chairman to introduce the panel, I would like to add a few comments for each of these revenue sources. A financial transaction tax is one imposed on purchase or sale of securities on individuals engaging in financial transactions of stocks, bonds, and derivatives. Most transactions today occur off-site on computer servers rather than trading floors. In fact, JP Morgan estimates that 80+% of the stock market is now on autopilot, either as passive investments in indices and ETFs or as trends following computer algorithms. Some argue that a financial transaction tax makes sense because of this dynamic. It is a minimal tax on large volume of trades that on paper results in a significant amount of revenue. However, the industry also has high mobility. Because trading is also done electronically on servers, it can be picked up and moved to another jurisdiction in a moment's notice. Because federal law requires any tax on transactions to have a nexus in the jurisdiction, if that nexus were to leave, the city would no longer have an ability to collect that tax. Given this dynamic, it is unlikely that revenues could be realized because the exchanges could convert the trades to their backup servers and the trades would disappear, jeopardizing thousands of jobs and key civic partners in the process. This is what occurred in New Jersey in a recent attempt to implement a financial transactions tax, and the reason why there are no financial transactions taxes anywhere in the US today. On September 11th, the New York Stock Exchange announced it was testing one of its equity exchanges on the backup server in Chicago. On September 28th to October 2nd, the New York Stock Exchange is testing one of its backup servers in Chicago to demonstrate its opposition to a proposed financial transaction tax in New Jersey. Additionally, the New York Stock Exchange is testing all of its exchanges on their secondary servers in the Midwest on September 26th to test its potential preparedness for a wholesale transition out of New Jersey. NASDAQ and CBOE also indicated in September that they would quit New Jersey if the financial transaction tax was passed by the New Jersey state legislature. Moving to the personal property lease tax, cloud computing currently accounts for approximately 28% of the city's total lease transaction taxes, which applies to businesses or individuals that either are a lessor or lessee of personal property used in Chicago. and this percentage is expected to grow even more in the short-term immediate term. The lease transaction tax on computer leases and cloud services is 7.25%, which is nearly 20% lower than all other leases in the city. Additionally, this has been a tax that has grown 14% over the last 10 years, with $328.7 million in revenues in 2019. And we expect to fare well during and after COVID, especially given the rapid growth of teleworking. We are looking at increasing this tax to 9% to match the tax for all other leases across the city. Moving to gaming revenues, video gaming, as authorized by the state, gives municipalities the authority to allow video gaming machines at for-profit businesses with a valid liquor license. The state imposed a 34% tax on net terminal income, or NTI, and only 5% of this tax is distributed to the municipality in which the tax is originated. This could, in theory, generate between 12 and 15 million in tax revenues for the city. However, as has happened across the state, video gaming has reduced profitability for casinos. For the first time in about 30 years, the city finally has statutory authority to license a casino in the city of Chicago. Based on a Union Gaming feasibility report, a casino in Chicago realizing $1.2 billion of gaming revenue a year could generate over $170 million of revenue for the city in its first full year of operation and nearly $250 million a year in a steady state. This is annual revenue and doesn't include the positive impacts of economic development generated around a casino, as well as the number of jobs that may be created. The city has issued an RFI to casino operators due October 21st. The purpose of the RFI is to gauge the casino market without requiring operators to respond to the full RFP. The document highlighted Chicago's strength as a global gateway city with a large regional customer base and major tourist destination. Its largely untapped gaming market and business-friendly environment, and its status as a world-class city with recognition for entertainment, dining, nightlife, and infrastructure. We believe the operators' responses will allow us to accurately assess where the casino market is from the perspective of the operators and adjust our planning process accordingly. We also believe it will provide insight into the location, size, amenities, and other features of a Chicago casino that operators would deem to be most viable, a first step to the development of an eventual high revenue yielding economic development project. Based on a Union Gaming feasibility report, more recently announced, it's believed that the tax structure is sufficient for us to be able to garner a competitive interest in an RFP process. Moving on to head tax, another revenue that will be discussed today is an employer expense or occupational privilege tax. More commonly called a head tax, this is a requirement that employers with more than a specified number of employees pay a flat tax per employee. In 2011, the last full year of the $4 per employee head tax, it generated $23.5 million in revenues for the city. This revenue does have a cost in that it is a disincentive to hiring. One thing to note is that a head tax disproportionately impacts companies who hire large numbers of employees, usually those who hire lower income employees. Further, according to BLS, Chicago's unemployment reached 17.5% before coming back down to around 12.6%, which is still very high. Taxing employment at the moment creates disincentives for employers to hire, which is counter-stimulative. We look forward to engaging in a discussion on these potential revenue streams and will be available to answer any questions. Now I'd like to turn the conversation back to Chairman Waguespack.
Thank you, CFO Bennett. Ladies and gentlemen, I think what we'll do is we will jump right into the LaSalle Street tax. We have a couple people on this topic, and I think first up we will have Terry Duffy. Let me just pull it up.
I'm here.
Oh, there you go. If you could introduce yourself and your organization, and then go ahead and make your comments, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Well, Chairman Waguespack, thank you, and members of the City Council Finance Committee, I appreciate it. Before I begin, let me tell you what a thrill it is for me actually to appear before you today. I wish I was in person because, as many of you may or may not know, my grandfather, John Duffy, was the chairman of the Finance Committee many, many years ago. So it's a real thrill for me to come full circle to present to you today. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak regarding the concept of imposing a financial transaction tax by the city of Chicago. As a Chicago native and resident, I share the concerns that you and every member of the city council have about fiscal challenges that our city faces. However, we disagree that a financial transaction tax would solve these challenges. In fact, we think that such a tax would make things far worse. Let me explain why. A transaction tax will increase the cost of trading in derivatives markets for all participants. What does that mean? It means that the bid-offer spreads of every single product will widen. This will pass higher cost onto commercials and producers in every market sector due to their risk management costs going up. In return, the commercials and producers pass those costs on to the consumers, who will have to pay more for everything from food to gas to mortgages. In short, a transaction tax will cost consumers far more than it ever could raise in revenue. To give you a sense of history of transaction taxes, India, Sweden, France, and Italy all saw a significant drop in the use of the financial markets there after imposing financial transaction taxes. And none of those countries has seen that business return since they instituted those fees. Imposing a financial transaction tax would drive away jobs and revenue that this great city sorely needs. Our company and the financial service sector continues to create jobs and economic growth throughout the city and the state. We have nearly 2,000 employees just in the city of Chicago, with many more jobs tied to the exchange, including trading firms, technology providers, law firms, accounting firms, real estate firms, and many other businesses related to our industry. While we're headquartered here in Chicago, CME Group no longer holds any real estate in the city. We lease our offices. We also lease our data center in Aurora from CyrusOne, which has 30 data centers located all over the country. Under our contract with them, we have the ability to be housed in any one of those 30 data centers. In addition, a number of states throughout the country have offered us incentives to move our company, with a clear understanding of what the benefits could be to the residents of their states if CME Group were to relocate to their state. We're not talking about idle threats. You heard from the CFO earlier. We've seen in the news, in response to the proposed financial transaction tax in New Jersey, the New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ announced plans to move their trading out of New Jersey and to their backup data centers here in Chicago. That's just to illustrate how quickly they can do so. As a global electronic financial services company, we are no longer four walls with a trading floor to gather price. Before I close, I'd be remiss if I did not mention to the committee all the financial support that CME Group and our trading partners have contributed over many years to early childhood education, K through 12, and higher education programs right here in the great city of Chicago. That being said, we stand ready to work with the Revenue Committee, the City Council, and the Mayor to support a fiscal solution that will put our city on a path to growth and prosperity. CME has operated in Chicago for 170 years. We know that Chicago is resilient and we want it to succeed. But as a business leader and a concerned citizen, I can assure you that a transaction tax will be a path to fiscal disaster. I want to thank the chairman and the committee for the opportunity to speak to you today, and I look forward to any questions you may have of me.
Thanks, Mr. Duffy. And if I could we're not going to have, I won't ask you any questions yet, but if any of the panelists have a statement or background information that you would like to share with us, if you could pass it through the IGA or our finance committee, that would be helpful. And I can disseminate that to all of the aldermen on the call and to the whole city council. So any reports that you have or panel discussions that you've done elsewhere, we do appreciate anything that you would like to send along. Next up will be Mr. Ed Tilley.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, and Vice Chair and members of the Finance Committee for inviting me today. I'm Ed Tilley, Chairman, President, CEO of Cboe Global Markets. Many of you know us as our previous name, Chicago Board Options Exchange, or CBOE. Several years ago, we changed our name to reflect our expansion into new products and geographies. We now operate financial markets around the globe with offices in numerous states and countries. Importantly, though, we remain proudly headquartered in Chicago. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today to provide my perspective on financial transaction taxes as a source of revenue for a municipality or a state. I understand why such taxes have appeal and may be perceived as a silver bullet that can remedy or offset financial struggles with little or no negative impact to the markets, and only impacting corporations or wealthy individuals. In actuality, a financial transaction tax harms investors and markets in dramatic ways. First and foremost, the tax itself is ultimately shouldered by Main Street investors, as the tax will be passed through to the individuals on each trade. As electronic trading has lowered trading costs, returns and portfolio protection historically enjoyed by more sophisticated investors are within reach for an expanding universe of retail investors. But a transaction tax would squarely impede that democratization of the markets. Further, a tax on trading, including short-term trading, dampens liquidity, harms spreads, and reduces the value of financial assets, all to the detriment of individual investors. At Cboe, we work tirelessly to cultivate markets that are liquid, efficient, fair, and accessible. We have seen in other countries that transaction taxes change behavior and that actual revenues falls far short of projected revenue. Indeed, extra costs imposed on investors and traders will cause them to trade less and at worse prices. This is bad for market structure, for retirement savings, and greatly diminishes any tax revenue associated with trading. A few words on a municipality or state-imposed financial transaction tax. Of course, the negative policy implications associated with financial transaction taxes apply to a locally imposed transaction tax. However, it is important to note that significant additional challenges are presented that effectively nullify the viability of a local transaction tax. First, the business of processing and executing trades is highly portable. There are no manufacturing plants or large-scale properties at forces involved. Second, competition is fierce between exchanges from different states and countries. The most minuscule pricing changes can cause significant volumes to be diverted from one exchange to another. In the US, Cboe competes vigorously with 18 out-of-state securities exchanges who would benefit greatly from extra charges imposed on Illinois transactions. Brokerages have fiduciary and regulatory obligations to customers and seek to execute trades at the lowest possible prices. An exchange subjected to an incremental tax, however small, could lose all or most of its business to market centers not subjected to such tax located in other jurisdictions. Thus, a locally imposed transaction tax will force market operators to move in order to insulate investors from the added costs and candidly to avoid dire business consequences. At Cboe, we are good corporate citizens and care greatly about the financial health of our city and our state. The local exchanges and the substantial ecosystem of trading firms that surround our exchanges have made Chicago the derivative center of the world, which has benefited the city and ancillary businesses in immeasurable ways. A transaction tax would put that all at risk. I don't envy the job before you as you search for revenue to help fund services and keep our city running. I can tell you unequivocally that a transaction tax is not the answer. It will do much more harm than good. Cboe stands ready to work with you through these difficult times, and I'm happy to answer your questions you may have today. And I do truly thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Tilley. If you could hold on there. And then again, if you have a statement that you'd like to forward to us, that would be helpful. Next up, we'll have Mr. Randy Bauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Randy Bauer. I'm a director with Public Financial Management, Inc. PFM is a national advisory firm to state and local governments. primarily in the areas of financial advisory, investment management, and management and budget consulting practices. And I lead our tax practice for state and local governments. I'm going to talk a little bit differently because this tax would not be targeted at PFM. Rather, we advise clients on good tax policy. Talk just briefly about some tax principles that generally apply to figuring out whether a tax makes sense or not. There's 4 of them that we generally rely on. Equity, which is fair treatment. That's usually either vertical equity, which deals with taxpayers with differing levels of income or revenue, and then horizontal equity, which is taxpayers in similar industries or lines of business or similar income and revenue. There's efficiency, which is the minimal interference with markets or business decisions. Adequacy, which maintains sufficient levels of revenue, collections and growth. And then finally, simplicity. The taxes are understandable from an external compliance perspective and also from an internal administrative perspective. We look at that and a financial transactions tax, which has been well described by the CFO and the 2 prior presenters. And note that this does target a specific industry. It may differentiate between different aspects of industries. The different financial transaction taxes that have been proposed or in a couple of cases adopted have differing methods as it relates to the rate and the base. And that can certainly impact on principles of efficiency, that they should not drive economic decisions, and horizontal equity, that they should not favor one type of business or business activity over another in the same industry. There are instances of industry-specific taxes where activities create negative externalities, and thus taxes are applied as a way of limiting the activity or compensating for those negative externalities. It's hard to make the case that that is the situation with a financial transactions tax. Often, the example is pointed to of the 2007-2008 financial crisis, that in some way high frequency trading was responsible for some of that. While there may have been examples of excesses, there is certainly a lot of instances that suggest that that wasn't the primary motivating factor, and there are probably better ways to deal with that as an issue than this type of a tax. In terms of the administration, I think the point is very well taken that nexus is a problem with this tax. If this tax were going to work, I would suggest it generally would have to be in today's economy at a national level and at a city level or even at a state level. It's particularly difficult. I mean, it is notable that New Jersey, which has generated a lot of the discussion around this tax of late, is putting together a budget that they're going to pass. It does not include this type of tax. It does include a millionaire's tax, which is also sometimes considered controversial. They're willing to go forward with that and put it in their budget, but they have not been willing to put this forward. From a policy perspective, and part of the argument for it is that it would generally be paid by higher income individuals. At the same time, there is going to be, it is going to eventually raise costs for all participants. And there's going to be some negative impacts. You may have assets held longer than what would otherwise be considered prudent. It may reduce hedging, that may reduce individual or corporate exposure, and that again may impact on market efficiency. So in general, I think there's a reason that this tax has been considered in a lot of places, but to date is not in use by any major state or local government.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer. Is that all set there? Okay. Finally, we'll have Lawrence Massal speak to the LaSalle Street tax.
Thank you, Chairman Wagersbeck and members of the City Council Finance Committee. I appreciate this opportunity to participate in your hearing. I want to commend the City Council for operating in this virtual format. I think it is a testament to the public service and the interest of all of the City Council members that you are operating amidst this pandemic. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that same level at the State General Assembly, which is not operating virtually, and that is also problematic when you consider this tax. So the Civic Federation, as many of you know, is a nonpartisan government research organization. We are not ideologically driven. We attempt to present evidence-based analysis of the city budget, state of Illinois budget, and try to come up with sustainable and reasonable financial plans or to support them by our governments. I think the biggest challenge of the idea of what is often called the LaSalle Street tax is that it doesn't seem to reflect an understanding of what happens currently on LaSalle Street or at any of our exchanges. Our biggest concern about the council looking to this tax is the enormous hurdles that we see in it ever being implemented. The first being the need for an exemption from the state law that prohibits such a tax. And because the Illinois General Assembly is not convening remotely, there's question as to when that would even be considered. The other is really the, as you heard from much greater experts than myself or at the Civic Federation, people are involved in this business. The old ideas about what happens at an exchange and the people in our ability to capture the traditional open outcry pit and the physical presence of the exchanges is developed into something that with the flip of a switch, the trade activity can be moved elsewhere. I think it's important that if this council was going to take it up, such a tax, that they really have a specific proposal that talked about the exact rate of tax that would be seek to be applied. And then the people that would be impacted could share with you how fast that would not be collected and what the disruption it would cause. The overall challenge for all of us in Chicago and Illinois is we have to get business back to feeling safe, to being predictable, to being open. That comes with ideally with a vaccine, that comes with at least a treatment for the disease, for the virus. And unfortunately, we're away from that. But the city faces, and you members of the city council face an unenviable Herculean task to try to close the $1.2 billion deficit for the coming year that you see in terms of revenue. That is, of course, based on the idea of no significant changes in operations. If there is not federal assistance coming in the form of revenue support, something that the Civic Federation has supported and has written to our major, to the members of Congress and the United States Senate, our delegation, as well as to other representatives. If the Congress does not come forward with revenue support, I think we're facing a very dire situation. But I don't think you can do it in a vacuum without recognizing the current economic conditions in Chicago cannot be understated. With over 12% unemployment in the city of Chicago at the general level, I think any new taxes that you seek to imply are going to have negative consequences. And this tax in particular, I don't believe has been well researched. I don't think it really, the proponents of it have reflected an understanding of how the electronic exchanges work right now. And I would just urge great caution and definitely much more specific analysis of what the rate structure would be and how it would be applied before going forward with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence. So I'm going to jump into questions from the aldermen. I have about 6 or 7 aldermen with questions specific to this issue of the LaSalle Street tax. And aldermen, we're going to take the second panel with the lease transaction, then gaming, then head tax. So if you could focus your questions just on LaSalle Street tax, make them short and sweet, I would appreciate it. And first up, I'll have Alderman Lopez. And then Alderman Lopez, if you could direct it to a particular person, that would be helpful, but they can also answer as a group or individually. Thank you. Alderman Lopez. Are you ready? Hold on a second, maybe we're.
Hey, Chairman, can I jump in and ask a question while we're waiting for Alderman Lopez?
Yes, you may.
So I know you said short and sweet, so can you please define that for me? Because, you know, it's one of my pet peeves when somebody hijacks a meeting and everything. So is it like one question, one comment, 1 minute, or is it like, 15 minutes of one question with, 5 parts?
Well, I won't be keeping a timer, but
I'll be doing it for you, so.
Okay, I will try to keep it to appropriate time.
Thank you.
Alderman Lopez, are you there?
Yes, Chairman. Sorry,
okay.
forgive me.
That's all right. Go ahead. You're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you everyone for being here today. Ms. Bennett, of all of the proposals that were listed in the beginning, how many of them would you say were actually actionable items that we as a city council can undertake ourselves?
The lease transaction tax is one that the city can undertake. The casino revenues is also another one that the city can undertake. Financial transaction tax requires state authority, but it's been mentioned a number of times, so we wanted to make sure there was a time for us to be able to discourse on that. And head tax the city could undertake. So all except for the financial transaction tax.
Okay. Now, if I may ask, what is the possibility, or actually to our panelists who are members of industry as well, I think, government's initial reaction is always to tax our way out of our problems. And I'll leave it at this because I know Alderman Sposato mentioned something about being brief. But I want to ask, what is the possibility, and I'll ask this to the panelists. Obviously, I know we're trying to generate revenue. We know that we have 800 million, we're short this year, 1.2 billion next year and whatnot. But what can we do to actually spur growth in this city so that we're widening the tax base, so that we're not strangulating the last remnants of life in this city, as opposed to actually building up our city again through growth so that we have a broader tax base? What are the options that we're seeing on the horizon that you all think that would be great for the city council to become welcoming to as we look forward to post-COVID?
So Chairman.
For the panelists, if that's a pretty broad question, Alderman. We were trying to keep it focused on the LaSalle Street tax, but if CFO Bennett wants to answer that, that's fine. I think
I'm only going to ask one question, so that was it, Chairman.
If
okay.
Chairman, I could jump in on the question. I think
I know. Go ahead. I think they all probably have answers too, but go ahead.
Okay. I think that's a great question to ask. We are very focused on how we can stimulate the economy because as I mentioned in my remarks, losing $783 million in revenues due to COVID, trying to regain that will be one of the most painless ways for us to be able to work our way through this budget gap. It's not going to be easy. I mean, this is one of the largest economic recessions that the city has faced since really the Great Depression. But we are doing our best to be able to do that given the limited funds we have. CARES Act money was applied to help provide stimulus. We've been advocating for additional federal funds and are working to try to really hope to support this economy as best we can. So look forward to your ideas on that as well. Obviously, would like to collaborate with you as we move forward through the budget process.
And Alderman Lopez, I'm sure she could have further discussions with you about that broader set of topics. And Lawrence, did you want to jump in on that one? I know you're going to speak to a couple others as well, and you always have a kind of a broad view of those issues. So if you
appreciate it. And I think it's an important question that the Alderman has raised in terms of what we face now in Chicago. The biggest challenge for all of us, of course, is the COVID and the economic disruption that was caused by it. But so what we're talking about is what can we do to promote economic activity? Well, absolutely the best thing would be to get through this pandemic, but it doesn't appear that we're going to get the vaccine or a treatment for this before your budget cycle needs to be done by the end of the year. So the 3 points that I would say we really need to do is to project confidence to the residents, the business people, the people who work in Chicago, and all Chicagoans that we have a path going forward. And that's going to require presenting something that promotes predictability. One of the worst things in business is to basically not know where we're headed from a tax policy, from a government direction. So, what really becomes key is that it's not just this budget cycle that you're trying to get through. You're trying to build the confidence that we have a long range plan to steer our city through this pandemic and the financial disruption and what is either a recession or the beginning of a depression that we're seeing. And that's going to require showing the details of how we're going to get through this. We have several other taxes we're going to talk about, but at the end of the day, what people in Chicago want to know, what business want to know is what are they going to have to pay in order to maintain their services, in order to maintain their city, and that it's going to be enough. And there are many structural problems that have existed before the pandemic, that existed before we disrupted the economy, that Chicago is at a disadvantage compared to other major cities. But it's also important to note that a lot of the economic loss is faced by almost every other major city, and it's not Chicago's fault that we have a pandemic and that we are now having the economic disruption. So in looking to solve the budget crisis of 2020, you have to have both a long-range plan and an immediate plan. If you don't get federal revenue support, which is still an open question, then you're going to have to make major changes. And those changes will include cuts and should include reorganization and revisiting how the city delivers all services, as well as how it interacts with every other level of government. Thank you.
Are you ready? Alderman Cardenas, are you there?
Yes, I am. I was listening to Lawrence Musal so intently that I was catching everything that he was saying. I'm going to try to focus on the LaSalle transaction tax because I do believe that we ought to be talking about revenue as well as expenditures and align those two with urgency at this moment. But at this time, I want to question Ed Tilley and Terry Duffy, if I may. Have you been asked on your 5-year plan? I would imagine as a company or as an organization, you usually plan out for the next 5 years what the trend is going to be for your business. Obviously, you're based on transactions. Can you give us a breakdown of what that looks like globally? I know you mentioned you have several outposts throughout the world, feeding your, I guess your servers or your transaction flow. Explain that to us, if you will, what it all means and why we're so intently going after your business. Because that is also shifting, I would imagine, with the proliferation of apps that you could trade and instantly with new apps that are lowering the cost of doing business. Can you answer that for me?
You want me to go, Ed, or you want to go?
Sure, Terry, why don't you jump in and I'll
Sure.
follow up.
So I think when we look at our plans for business, obviously no different than you, it's a real-time situation with the pandemic. So our plans are fluid like everybody else's. But when I try as a CEO and chairman of this organization and took it public back in 2002, we have a 2-year plan, a 3-year plan, and a 5-year plan. Now, obviously, a lot of that is depending upon volumes and our growth of our business. So, of course, we would all like to be able to predict what volumes are going to look like 5 years down the road, but that's impossible and it always has been in our world. But we are focused on cost. We are focused on growth. And one of the things I was going to add when Alderman Lopez asked about where we can go, it's growth. And that's how we exactly look at it. We've been able to grow our business globally. We're in over 200 countries around the world today, but we're headquartered here in the city of Chicago. That lends to great growth for the city and its tax base. So that's really what we're focused on, is bringing more jobs. My average age of my employees at CME Group is 43 years old. I skew it because I'm 62. But you got to realize that these are highly paid individuals that are paying a lot of tax. I want to bring more of those people into my organization. That's a way to continue to grow the business. Unfortunately, people are looking for bright, shiny objects. They're not available in today's world. What is available is long-term growth for our industry in being headquartered in the city of Chicago. So unfortunately, I can't give you projections on growth. When you're looking at apps, I think you're referring to Robinhood, which is a free app that people can trade for free. I'm very concerned about any time you could do something for free that there's hidden costs behind door number 2, and it seems to be the case with that and other apps. So Again, I think when we look at our plan, we're a very diverse company. We're all over the world. We're thrilled to be headquartered here in Chicago, but we think growth, I'm sure Ed will say the same thing, we're only on the beginning of our growth trajectory. We're not in the ninth inning, as they say in baseball. We're continuing to grow these businesses each and every year. And if you look at the 20-year CAGR for CME Group, it's up 15% year over year over the last 20 straight years in a row. That's an impressive growth that you want to have in the city of Chicago.
So what you're saying in post-pandemic, you do plan to bring back those people to work out of offices, to work out of your facilities downtown. Is that what you're saying?
So I will tell you, Alderman, I have not let I have kept every single one of my employees throughout the world, especially here in Chicago, not fired anybody because of the pandemic. My goal, and I've told my employees, I'm going to speak to them again next week, so I don't want to give too much of a preview to that, but they will be returning to their offices when it is safe. We're not going to go this far and decide to bring everybody back when it's inappropriate, but we will be bringing people back to the office. I believe we're more productive when we're out in the office, and I also believe it's better for the economy, not only for the city, but the state, but globally, when we have people together and generate ideas. So yes, that is the ultimate goal. Very shortly, sir.
Thank you. By the way, just so you know, I'm not necessarily in support of this LaSalle Street tax. I think that we could do a better job of growth, like you're saying, laying out a strategy to keep you growing and have more people here in Chicago. That's why I was concerned about, post-pandemic plans of you bringing back the workforce, because that's going to be indicative and clearly the key to bring back Chicago as quickly as we can. But I just wanted to get an idea in terms of what did all the business and the entities and transaction flow, because I think we keep thinking that somehow there's a golden goose there somewhere, but we got to cost contain ourselves out of this mess and do some other things. There's some stuff out there, but I don't think in this case that's one of them. But thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Tilly might want to respond.
Let me just add a little bit to that. I think, Terry, you summed it up perfectly. I think growth for us, there's a ton of organic growth that we have in our future. We've been very public on this. We are creating new products, as Terry is, and new products then all of the trading shops that are in Chicago and global actually will then come to SIBO, which is again still based in the city of Chicago. Not only do we not have plans to move from Chicago, we've just committed to the old post office space. So we're moving down the street. Like Terry, we have not let anyone go because of the pandemic. It's quite the contrary. We're hiring. So we're recruiting in this remote environment and doing so successfully. So we see the future as quite bright. We see our home here in Chicago, a huge investment, and then further growth. The more and more we can trade here, the more and more there's interest in Chicago remains that derivatives capital of the world. There's no market like it, and there's no city that has a trading community as vibrant as Chicago, period.
Thanks, Mr. Tilly. Okay, Alderman O'Shea.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm so happy to hear both with what Chairman Duffy and Chairman Tilly had to say. Moving forward, we need the CBOE and the CME for our future. Just riding on the coattails of what was said, the reinvestment and the commitment to the future of Chicago, those two organizations are two of our pillars. What I do think is that the City Council should spend more time listening to and asking questions of Mr. Lawrence Masal as he guides us through the many unfavorable options we do have. I completely agree that looking at a LaSalle Street tax is a really bad idea, that even if someone thought it was a good idea, it would be incredibly hard to execute and probably would never happen no matter what the terms were. And in closing, Chairman Duffy, although I never knew your grandfather, John J. Duffy, who served as alderman in the 19th Ward from 1935 to 1950, he was a World War I veteran. He came home 99 years ago from the war and opened up J.J. Duffy Florist Company. Sure. When I host my senior events here in the community to this day, it's not uncommon for an elderly senior in my community to tell a story about how your grandfather was there to help their family during difficult times back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And he lived just a few blocks from where I grew up in Christ the King. Thank you, Mr. Duffy, for all your support of Special Olympics and for all your support, particularly early childhood here in the city over the years. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman. Thank you.
Thanks, Alderman. Alderman Moore?
Thank you, Chairman. So first of all, it's a pleasure meeting all of you. Definitely finally pleasure meeting you, Mr. Duffy. I've heard some good things about you from my mentee, Lonnie Chambers, and I want to thank you for giving him that opportunity. Now, with that said, I have to look at everything from the eye from my community. And so when I see places like CVS, who had already left way before COVID, Bank of America pull out of our community, Save-A-Lot. And so then when I hear, I forget who said about having a lot of their employees making over, they didn't name amount, but they say a lot of money who's paying these taxes. I would like to ask the question, what percentage of African Americans are in that? And I ask that question because it becomes a reality to what we're dealing with here. And that when people saying companies will leave, this or left, where we're at on the south side of Chicago, it's already gone. You know, we already, I'd be shocked if we can go any lower. And so when I say that, and then when I look to ask the question of a 5 cents on every $100 of high volume, transaction versus a small investor like myself, who by the time they get into the market is paying, top dollar for a stock. How does that, we're not winning over here. So help me translate that, because when I'm talking to my community, what everybody else was saying, they're not hearing. And so therefore you have to tell me something that makes me say that we shouldn't do this, because on the surface of where I am, we should. So I need to hear that, and I'm not hearing that.
If I may, thank you, Alderman. I appreciate it. And Lonnie's a terrific young man, so I really enjoy helping him along in his studies, and obviously the great football player that he is. Let me just make a couple comments from the area that you're at. I went to school at 79th and Sangamon and Leo High School, so I know the area quite well. I can't make changes for everybody, but all I can do is say something, and Ed Tilley said it probably better than I did it during the questions and answers. Every little nuance into our business is an additional cost. And what I was trying to say during my prepared remarks earlier, when there is the smallest amount of additional burden on the market makers of the market, they have to widen out those spreads by that cost and more. So everybody, when you say what's wrong with the 5 cents on a dollar, someone would probably say, well, geez, there shouldn't be anything wrong with that. The problem is the average participant in the market. 5
cents on every $100.
5 cents on every $100, right? So the problem is every transaction that is done on our exchanges, it doesn't mean that they're successful transactions and they make money. A lot of them lose money. And so you'd be taxing on losses. That is pretty much unprecedented, to tax on losses before they're either realized or not. And then when people talk about notional value of trades, the average market maker who provides this liquidity so producers and commercials can do their offset, their average gain or loss is in the cents as well. It's not in the dollars that they're trying to make per trade. It's very, very small. So any little part of tax that you add on to the cost of the market maker gets passed on, like I said earlier, to the producers and commercials, which gets passed on to the consumers. We don't want to see that happen. So a penny wise, pound foolish tax is exactly what this is. So I don't have all the answers for the great area of the south side of Chicago, but I do know that we need more investment. And the only way we're going to do that is continue to grow our business and be a part of every community of the city of Chicago, which is exactly what we in SIBO tried to do. I can't answer the question why $5 on $100, what does it matter? It matters a lot. And I would take forever to get into the weeds to express that to you about these algorithms and the way they provide all this liquidity today, how much that could actually add up to on a per trade basis. You're talking about a tremendous amount of money, because if you weren't, I assure you wouldn't be trying to institute a tax that brought you $100. or $1,000 or even $1 million. You're looking for a tax that scores in the hundreds of millions of dollars over a 10-year period. So think about how many transactions you have to do in order to get to that level. It's a lot. So it's very meaningful to every participant in the marketplace, which there's a trickle-out effect to the consumer. I'm not sure if I explained it properly, but hopefully it's a very nuanced business. And I know Ed's got the same problems when we try to explain this, but it's very difficult.
I think all
Mr. Tilley, did you want to
Sure.
respond?
So just briefly, Terry nailed it. The amount that is made per transaction, even your 5 per 100 is a big number in a percentage term. I think rather, Alderman, your challenge to us in the invitation that Terry and I both made in our prepared remarks is how can we partner with communities, your community in particular that you raise, very important to us. So if it's more in education, if it's more in representation, that's an ask for another day, that you have our support. We are tied to this community, all communities, and we accept the challenge and happy to take offline ways that we can be much more visible. But this transaction tax is just going the wrong way. Commissions are going to zero, and any tax is going to change behavior. I just don't think you realize what other financial model you would be predicting that we would be able to bring in as a city and revenues. It's just not likely to happen.
Okay, so
Can I make?
go ahead, please come in.
Alderman Moore, let Mr. Bauer respond.
Absolutely.
I just would like to make one comment, and that is that the only city that has had this tax, New York City, has not collected it since the 1980s. They've completely rebated it. And if you think Chicago taxes are high, New York City's taxes are even higher. And the fact is that the New York Stock Exchange convinced the city that they would leave. And you aren't going to collect any tax if those that you're taxing leave. And ultimately, then it's going to hurt you even more, because these are very productive businesses that pay a lot of other taxes.
Yeah, I get that part, and I appreciate you saying that, but that's right now what I'm filling out here versus Mr. Tilley's statement and Mr. Duffy's statement was somewhat more acceptable in their willingness to work. What you just said just only put me in the position that I'm already in anyway. And when when you so low, you can't sometimes go lower. And when I see that, what I do is I hear opportunity for people and businesses in my community to even be more self-sufficient. So when you say that, that's what I hear, which is a positive thing for me, versus what I'm hearing Mr. Tilley and Mr. Duffy say is how can we partner and grow in these areas, not only with workers within CME and CBOE, but also developing and building businesses within our communities. Because if that was happening, and then somebody came in here and say a financial transaction tax, I'd be the first one to say, hell no, get the hell out of here. We're growing here. But if I'm not growing, I'm saying yes, take that money. And so that's the piece we have to leave here with the things that Mr. Tilley and Mr. Duffy said, and I will be reaching out because we have to make this happen other than just a promise.
So Alderman, if I may comment real quick, we have multiple groups called employee network groups from all different communities, from Black groups to Hispanic groups to gay pride groups to everything across the spectrum of our employee base that are from all parts of the city. We want to continue to hire and educate and bring people into our financial services business. We think having a diverse business is a business that can grow. And if we're going to try to grow with everybody looking the same, it's not going to happen. I've told my board that. I've told my employee base that. So if you came and saw my employee base from 10 years ago and you came and saw my employee base today, you'd say, what a change. And a lot of those people come from all different parts of the city. So that's what makes a diverse city. And that's what's going to make us continue to grow as an institution here in Chicago. So I appreciate your comments, sir.
Thanks, Mr. Duffy. We're going to have Alderman Sawyer, then Smith, Napolitano, and Raboris focus in on this LaSalle Street tax, and then we'll move on to our second topic, the lease transaction tax. And then if I could throw in one question here for Mr. Bauer. You mentioned the word rebate. So if you could address that after Alderman Sawyer speaks.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. And very quickly, and I guess maybe Mr. Duffy and Mr. Tilley instruct me. I think maybe we're asking you the wrong question. We're talking about an industry, a growth industry, which is financial transactions. I'm a finance major. I've held a Series 7 license. I have a working knowledge about what you do. So when you talk about your average growth, 15% year over year, and I'm not sure about what taxes you do pay locally, if any, outside of your personal sales tax and real estate tax. We're asking, how can you participate a well-heeled institution, if you will, with the both Mr. Tilley, Mr. Duffy, who I highly respect, but we're asking the question, how can you help participate in the governance of this financial portion of us governing the city without negatively disrupting your business? Now, is the financial transaction tax the answer? Maybe not. But I guess, is that the correct question we should be asking you? I guess that's my only one and only question I'm trying to get clear on.
So I will tell you, Alderman Sawyer, that last year and the preceding years, CMA Group has paid over $100 million to the state of Illinois, of which I'm assuming the state of Illinois then returned certain amounts to the city of Chicago.
That's correct.
So we are, I believe, the fourth highest taxpayer in the state of Illinois. It is truly amazing for a company that's headquartered in a city that has a global business, as I said earlier, in 200 countries around the world, that has nexus to multiple different jurisdictions, to still be paying the kind of taxes that we're paying in the state of Illinois. If in fact I was to move the company to a state like Texas or Florida or others, I would be paying zero. I would not be paying that $100 million. So a lot of that goes into it. And then you have to look at all of our, not only our employee base, but as Mr. Tilley said, our trading communities who are paying taxes, whether it's property taxes. I pay property taxes in the city of Chicago. I know that I'm one of the higher property taxes, and I'm okay with that. I've been very blessed. But I think there's a lot of tax revenue that comes out of our industry indirectly that is not taken into account. And instead, we're trying to add up volume, and we're trying to put a percent to it or a dollar figure to it and say there's $700 million over 10. It doesn't work that way. We put a lot of money into this city and state every single year. We want to continue to do so, but we don't want to do it in a way that puts us in a competitive disadvantage, as Mr. Tilley said, by adding cost to a transaction. That is so detrimental to our industry.
I understand, but I just want you to share our, we have a bit of a frustration, and
Understood.
When we see entities like this, and that, quite honest, even during the pandemic, you all are doing quite well. Maybe not as well as before, but you're still, come on. And plus, if you move, you're not going to get the restaurants you're going to get. You can't go to Bismarck, North Dakota and get a steak where you get one today.
We're not going there, I can assure you that.
I think just for a sense of perspective, our effective tax rate's about 26%. So we are not one of those U.S. companies that has a great deal of assets offshore. And specifically, we're much smaller than our bigger exchange across the street, Terry's operation. We paid Illinois about $21 million in 2019. So, and of course, like Terry, some of that then to the city of Chicago. So, we are here and paying taxes. That is not a complaint. And like Terry, this is my home. I'm an Illinois resident, and again, a very fortunate Illinois resident. And I am not the guy complaining about a city tax or property tax in that regard. We're just the practicality of raising expenses. To be quite clear, this financial transaction tax would not be paid by the CBOE or the CME.
True. Right.
This would be paid by Main Street investors, as you know, that would show up in the bid-ask spread and what the cost is to trade the most simple securities trade or most simple futures trade. So this is not even proposed to affect our bottom line. This would be a pass-through to our users and raise their cost. And that, I think, is the most alarming, because as you know, individuals, if it's going to cost an individual more to do something, they don't do as much of it. And this would be no different.
Last issue, if it was nationalized, I think that'd be more to Mr. Bauer or my good friend Lawrence Masal. What would be the consequences if it was a nationalized issue?
I have testified, Alderman, probably in the neighborhood of 20 times over my 20-year career as chairman and CEO on this particular issue. And when I educate or talk about to the Congress, whether it's the House or the Senate, and I explain to them the equation that I did to you and the other members of the council of who's going to ultimately pay this tax. There's not been an administration on either side of the aisle that has supported it once you go through it. There are fringe participants who support it, but as a whole, the Congress understands that this cost would be passed through to the people that Mr. Tilley just outlined, which are the people of the United States in higher prices. If risk management costs go up, then the cost on the grocery shelves and everything else goes up. Someone has to pay for it. And they understand it. So I'm not saying it's never going away, but from the federal level, like I said, whether it's the Democratic administrations or Republican administrations, neither side has decided to undertake this transaction tax at a federal level.
Yep.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Let me jump over to Alderman Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you see me now? Somehow
Yes.
I can't, I'm not on the thing. Well, thank you very much. And I really appreciate the conversation about how much you pay in taxes. And let me ask, is that just your Illinois corporate tax?
For CME, our Illinois corporate tax runs right around $100 million a year.
Yeah, and that's just what that is. Okay.
That's not federal. That's not federal.
No, it's just your, yeah, that's your Illinois taxes. Do you pay federal
Yes, we
income
do.
taxes? Okay.
Yes, we do.
We have to ask.
A lot more than 100 million too.
Yeah, I bet you do. Okay. Well, I guess I have to say, I have not been in favor of this tax, and I share the frustration of my colleagues. We are facing a historic problem right now, and the CME, the Board of Options Exchange, are in fact one of the leading businesses of our city, one of the things we're most proud of. I admit I have a little bit of a biased history. I used to be a prosecutor, and I convicted a bunch of traders at First Commodity Corporation of Boston many, many years ago. So I can't say that everything that the industry has done has been a good thing. And I'm sure you're aware that the financial industry in general is not really well liked in America after the suffering that was inflicted on many communities, particularly the African American and Latino communities that were really whacked hard by the loss of home equity during the 2008 financial crisis. And so I was very interested in what you had to say about a question for another day. And that's where I fell off the beam, because it's not a question for another day. It's a question for right now. Our CFO has said that this is the largest financial crisis we face since the Depression. And it is a depression that was caused by the government, in a way, by the failures on the national level. And I strongly believe that government is very responsible to every American citizen for what has happened, because we didn't know how to manage a pandemic. That may be a national question. Unfortunately, Chicago can't run a deficit. So we face, and our Supreme Court, in its wisdom, said we can't change pensions. This is reality, not the kind of wishful thinking that people either on the right or the left have the ability to freeform on, because they don't actually have to pass a budget by the end of this year that is balanced. So my question is, are there one-term sources of revenue or agreements that can't be reached with the city fathers of Chicago to help keep our city on track? that you might be willing to participate in. Because the last time we had a shortfall like this, we sold the parking meters, which was truly the worst deal for our city because we were not that far from where we're at today. I certainly don't support any other assets to make some investment group rich because we have a short-term problem. But the truth is we're facing massive layoffs or things like that. Because, you know, as you know, 80% of our budget, I think that's right, is people. I recall that during a very early financial panic in the late 1800s, I think it was one of the financial titans of New York who personally came to New York's rescue in a short period of time. I know that in 1974, when I was living in New York, it was the financial giants of New York that helped keep New York going. And here we are in Chicago. So
Alderman.
I don't, and I'm asking what your industry is willing to do to help keep our city going. That's my question, Alderman Wagesback. That's the only question I have.
Okay. Dive in, gentlemen.
I'll dive in, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like. I'd say that our industry is doing a lot and is continuing to do it, as I said earlier, for 170 years. These businesses didn't get to where they're at without a tremendous amount of investment, Alderman, and that's what we do. My cost base on an annualized basis is $1.6 billion, of which 70% of my cost base is in paying my employees, of which in return, they pay taxes to the city of Chicago, state of Illinois, and the federal government. So the more I can continue to build my business, that tax base is only going to get larger. I mean, again, there is no bright, shiny object here. And I understand about balancing budgets because I have to do it every single time as a public company. But at the same time, you know, I don't think it's Mr. Tilley's job or mine to try to tell you how to get your revenue. You make your proposals, and so, you know, the rest of the constituents have to live with it. All I can do is assure you that we are working night and day to build our businesses. And if we build them, we believe there'll be more revenue for all. And there's not much more than we can do than that. I guess we could run for public office, but I think Ed and I will probably stay in our day jobs.
I wish I had a better answer on a silver bullet. I don't. But you listened to me and to Terry. We're growing businesses here. We're hiring people here in the middle of a pandemic. We are growing, and I just want you. That is your takeaway. I can't go back to 2008 and the failings of major banks and institutions. Exchanges did not fail. Exchanges and their proprietary trading firms did not fail. We operated flawlessly as we have done so far through this pandemic. Let us keep hiring. Let us keep growing. Call on us on ideas. That invitation is there. We are committed here. But let us do what we do well, and that is to grow businesses and to hire people.
I also would say, Alderman, you know, during the times that you referenced, the great monopolies of our time back then, J.P. Morgan, Carnegie, and others had a kind of a, they were incented to make sure the wheels kept moving because they were the only game in town. As Mr. Tilley clearly stated, he's competing with 18 other exchanges in the United States alone, let alone the global market. We're competing with the global market all throughout the world. That's a huge difference in having a total monopoly on every single thing like the people of JP Morgan and Carnegie and others had when they were participating in the growth back in New York City.
Can I just jump in here, Chairman, and make a comment?
Yeah, please do. And then I wanted to let Alderman Napolitano or Boris wrap it up and just try to move on to the other three topics.
Mr. Chairman, please add Alderman Hopkins to the attendance roll.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Great. So I'm hearing a lot of comments in some of the questions related to equity and how it is that we're making investments across the city. And importantly, that there's a desire that, you know, we all chip into this budget together. That's something that we've talked a lot about as a city, and we're very focused on, both by way of how it is that we're generating revenues, but to the point that Alderman Cardenas made earlier, that it's about the broader budget as well. How are we looking at our expenses? How are we generating efficiencies? How are we making investments? It's a key focus for us, as we've demonstrated in the 2020 budget, as we've demonstrated in various announcements we've made about Invest Southwest and and ensuring equity in how we're approaching those investments. The fact that we have made significant investments in areas more so than in previous years, and I spoke to some of that in my comments. So I think, you know, in addition to the conversation we're having here about this particular revenue source, which has some of its challenges, as evidenced by some of the recent experience of other states who've attempted this revenue, you know, we are most certainly looking at this as in that we are all in this together. We want to come out of COVID, you know, together. And so it's important that we maintain balance as we're approaching the budget and, you know, not finding that we're, you know, leaving certain aspects of our economy behind, which ultimately then means they won't be there to help us in the recovery. I also want to echo on some of the comments that have been made. Lawrence made this comment as well, where growth is a very important part of what will help us to get out of this crisis. Chicago is Chicagoland broadly is a $700 billion GDP. And that type of economic engine is enormous. Will have a lot of power for us as we do move out of COVID. It's very painful right now, which we know, you know, we have to find a way through this budget in the next several months. But we also have to remember that, you know, that is going to be one of our greatest tools and how it is that we can achieve a longer term structural balance, which is the goal. And so we are, you know, taking all of that into account. I think mostly as we are talking about each of these specific revenue sources, it's also important to consider the broader landscape of how they fit within the Chicago finances, but also the broader economy. How do we all grow together so that then we can create a more equitable and, you know, and fair budget as we are moving out of COVID. Chairman, turn it back.
Thanks, CFO. Alderman Napolitano or Boris, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Alderman Napolitano, go ahead.
Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and thanks for everybody that's here today. To the gentleman on the panel today, I really appreciate you giving your time kind of to work through this. I have a couple of very brief questions. I just want to make sure you know this is not Inquisition style questions because I think it's just more to the better good of what we could do, what we can't do, and excuse my ignorance on any points where I don't have the proper answer. That's my fault. But I think one of the biggest points that was brought up was that has to be said over and over again that this is probably the biggest economic recession that Chicago's had since the Great Depression. And that being said, all this burden is probably going to fall on the taxpayers in some sort of property tax increase of some sort. So just working to find a way to alleviate that or make it a little bit less of a burden. Quick question to Chairman Duffy, I believe, sir. For the CME group, money made by the CME group would be done by transaction fees. Is that correct?
That's correct. Clearing fees, but the same idea.
Same idea. Okay. And again, sir, these are just things that I'm just asking just to figure out to get through this. In February 1st of 2020, I think CME had increased that transaction fee by up to about 5 cents. Is that correct?
I don't have the exact cent. We don't have a cents per trade because most of my fees, whether they're increased or not, are done through volume tiers, Alderman. Gotcha. So if you're backing into a cent per trade, that would be kind of a difficult thing to do. We don't do it that way. We look at how much you would trade as an individual. And if you trade more, you would pay less. If you trade less, you may pay a little bit more. So we adjust tiers on volumes because, as I said earlier, we have a huge cost of running this business. So yes.
Absolutely. Okay, understandable. And the reason why I asked that, and I know that a couple of concepts have been brought up in the past on the LaSalle Street tax, and one that was brought up is if the city of Chicago was to implement, say, and I'm just thinking hypothetically, a 5 cent tax per trade. I believe in 2019, the CME group traded about 17.8 million contracts. On the city of, on average, I could be wrong, and I apologize.
That's a day, just so we're clear.
I'm sorry, yeah, per day. If we instituted like somewhere around a 5 cent tax increase, which I'm assuming when you increased fees in the past, I'm assuming it didn't hurt the market. It probably hurt the trade or the person making the trade or affected them, but I'm assuming it probably didn't change the market for them. And my question is this: if hypothetically we did institute something like a 5-cent trade per contract, we're talking the city of Chicago can average about $890,000 per day, or up to $253 million per year. Concept-wise, shoot me down if it's wrong. I know this has to go through state legislation and everything too. It's not on the city of Chicago, but would it be feasible to do something like that on, say, a 5-year sunset provision, where on the back end, after something like that, CME Group or the trading groups downtown get something in return, such as like a tax relief or something to get us through this economic recession that hasn't been seen before since the Great Depression. And I don't want to put you on the spot, because I do appreciate your industry big time. I actually worked down at the Mercantile Exchange in the 90s, and I know what you guys do, and I know what how important it is to the city of Chicago and the global market. I'm just one of those people that is looking for every way possible to make it easier for Chicago, for you, as a marriage with the city of Chicago for so many years, as well as to our taxpayers. Is a concept like that, where you introduce the tax, and increase the fee in February, is it doable? Because I'm assuming it didn't kill your market.
So, Alderman, let me just respond real quickly to you, and I know that the chairman wants to move this along. First of all, I've been here 40 years, and I've been this chairman CEO since 2002. I have never instituted a volume-weighted tier change unless I brought something to the equation. So I bring value to that participants or those participants if I'm to raise those volume tiers. I am not a believer, never have I ever been a believer of the "cause you can" strategy. The "cause you can" strategy is going back to what the alderman earlier said, what they did back in New York when they had the monopolies. It's "cause you can, you can do whatever you want." That's not where we're at. We're very competitive. So I'm a big believer that I need to bring a value add before I change any tiers whatsoever. And that's been my mantra since day one here at the exchange. As far as a sunset goes, sir, I will tell you the following. Anybody that follows taxes or policy doesn't believe sunsets ever go away. And they are very difficult to sell to any community, especially as somebody as suspicious as I am and has been in this way too long, that understands sunsets don't go away. So I can't imagine anybody saying, yeah, sounds good to me, let's do a sunset and we'll get a rebate in return. If you tell me we're going to own part of Chicago, if you can, give it to me in a put option, then maybe we can talk, but that's not reality either, because it's owned by the taxpayers. So the bottom line is, sir, with all due respect,
Absolutely.
Because of the increases that I have are volume based, and they're not reoccurring, because if they trade less, I don't get the money anyway. And secondly, I do it with a value add. Thirdly, we don't believe in sunsets ever go away, and that's just the cynical nature of a CEO in any major city, not just Chicago.
Alderman.
We're just a little
Go ahead.
different. We have 18 different exchanges that we're competing with. The volume would just go to the East Coast in this instance, and the transactions wouldn't occur in Chicago, sunset or not. In the short term, the transactions just go to my competitors.
Thanks, Mr. Tiller. All right, Alderman, all good there? I mean, if you have other questions, we can
they
circle back
Thank you.
around with them separately.
Yep, they hit it on the mark. Thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate their time and on this matter.
Yep.
Thank you, sir.
Alderman Boris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one quick question, and I want to thank the Mr. Tilley and Mr. Duffy for being before us, and I also want to thank Mr. Masol, who I deeply respect and who's with us during this time. Not knowing, or I should say, knowing very little about the finance, and that's me, I'll be very honest. And we understand that there is no silver bullet. We understand that. But my question is, how do you set a standard on growth when predictability cannot or should not be the starting point? And I hope I asked that correctly.
I think you did. So you're asking us how can we predict growth in order to help with the city's concerns going forward, and how, I guess,
concrete with that information we have on potential growth? I guess that's kind of the question. The way I would answer that, Alderman, and Mr. Tilley may answer it different from his perspective. I would say, look at our history, look where we came from, look where we were at just a few short years ago. CME and CBOE were a shadow of their former self just 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and now we're multi-conglomerate exchanges that are all throughout the world. And we're headquartered here in Chicago, and we're bringing more and more dollars. I didn't pay $100 million to the state of Illinois just a handful of years ago, but that's through our growth. So I can't predict the future growth, sir, but what I'm showing you is a trajectory, and I think Mr. Tilley outlined it earlier, that is very positive for the city. So even though we can't give it to you with 100% certainty, we can only tell you to look at the history, in the recent history, how our growth is and what we contribute.
My answer is the same. Our trajectory is very, very public. It has been just an incredible story. There are a number of new products that both of us have introduced to the market that we didn't have 10 or 15 years ago. So there's new, there's existing, there's uptake from new users. This has been the year of the new retail. Everything from our perspective, even in the uncertainty in the short term here through this pandemic, we're looking through that and still building for 2021 and beyond. So we're steady as it goes, and upward in growth is our plan, and that's how we're budgeting ourselves for the years forward. We get paid to grow very transparently between us and our shareholders, and I get paid to grow this business, not to keep it status quo.
And Chairman, I might add, as it relates to the city's broader finances, we've already seen some of the growth from the very depths of this COVID crisis. Chicago saw a negative 10% GDP in the second quarter of 2020. At this point, we've recovered half of that. We're obviously looking to what the revenues are coming in at on a regular basis. And could never predict what that growth is going to look like going forward. But we know that we have seen, in essence, a mini V-shaped recovery at this point. The real question becomes what it looks like going forward. Will it be V-shaped? Will it be some other shape? But some of that growth has already existed. So, in some ways, we have seen already a very significant depth. It's important that we continue to be vigilant about our COVID response in order to help support the recovery. Both in the city as well as nationally, and are really working to try to keep that growth moving as quickly as we can.
Thank you, CFO. Thank you, Alderman. I'm going to jump over to gaming, but I want to thank Mr. Tilley and Mr. Duffy for their comments today. And I know that many of the aldermen have worked with them in the past, so I would encourage you to reach out to them directly if you wanted to have further discussion on this issue. And if you have other questions, whether you're on the committee or not, if you want to direct them through the committee, we can get them out to them about more details about other aspects of the business. So I thank both of you for your coming out today or being on the Zoom call, because it really helps us, I think, talk through these issues and learn more about your perspectives on it. So thank you very much.
Chairman, can I leave their contact numbers with you so I can reach out to both?
Yes, we will.
Mr. Tilley and Mr. Duffy, please.
Yes, sir. Yeah, we'll get all that and get it to individual members. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I say thank you to you, your committee, and the mayor for allowing myself to participate in today's meeting.
I echo that as well. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.
Stay healthy.
You too.
Okay. CFO Bennett, we're going to jump over to the gaming section here. Did you want to say anything on the lease, or did you want to wait until the end on that?
I could wait till the end. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. All right. So on gaming, we will have Grant Govertson and Tennille Jackson. Grant, if you're there, if you would like to start off with your comments, just make sure you mention your name and the organization you're with, and we'll let you go ahead and start out.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Grant Govertson, and I'm a principal at Union Gaming Group. We were the firm that was engaged by the Illinois Gaming Board last year to conduct a feasibility study on the Chicago casino license. We subsequently, at our own expense, updated that report to account for the 2020 legislative changes to the tax rates on the Chicago casino. And then we've worked in significant other or numerous other capacities as it relates to gaming in Illinois. There are four primary points that I would like to discuss. The first is with respect to the wagering in Illinois report that is published, the 2019 update, rather, that's published by the Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability in Illinois. And I'd like to mention a quote. And the quote is, "While there are an abundance of factors causing the decline in casino numbers, undoubtedly a major contributing factor to this fall off is the increased competition resulting from the growth of video gaming," unquote. To those that follow the gaming industry, this isn't surprising. You know, the sheer convenience factor of video gaming has not only resulted in cannibalization of casinos, but it has clearly grown the gaming pie significantly larger than it was prior to the introduction of video gaming. However, you know, just because the pie is significantly bigger, that doesn't mean that the city would benefit. You know, clearly the state has benefited significantly from the introduction of video gaming and the taxes associated with it. But it's important to note that the city in specific, just due to the structural tax rate differences, wouldn't enjoy the same benefits. And that leads me to the second point, and that is that structural tax difference between video gaming for the city's tax receipts related to that, and then the city's tax receipts related to a casino. Let me walk you through an example, and you know, and if we assume that's $300 million in video gaming revenue and $300 million in casino revenue. On the video gaming side, the city receives approximately 5.7% of gaming revenue. Of course, the state receives a much larger share, but of the city's share, it'd be about $17 million related to that $300 million in total gaming revenue. On the casino side of the equation, $300 million in slot machine revenue would result in approximately $58 million in taxes to the city of Chicago. So same amount of gaming revenue, but notably different tax receipts, 17 million versus 58 million. And that's entirely a function of the statutory tax rates on each, with the city of Chicago being the only casino in the state of Illinois that meaningfully shares in the gaming revenue taxation. The other 10 existing casinos and the future casinos, other than the one in Chicago, don't enjoy that same benefit. That's my second point. The third is just a real world example of the two gaming types coexisting together. If you look at Peoria, and we looked at Peoria simply because it's an isolated geography that's not influenced by other states, for example, or other casinos. There's only one. So it's a fairly pristine example. And what we found was, you know, approximately 57% of gaming revenue generated from people living within a close drive time of the casino. About 57% of gaming revenue is allocated to the casino, and about 43% is allocated to video gaming. So, you know, what this shows is, yes, clearly, you know, video gaming is very popular, and the convenience factor really is what drives those revenues. You know, even though, you know, the industry view is generally that the casino proposition is generally more attractive. So, you know, you've got restaurants, you've got bars, you've got entertainment, and so it's just, the point is, the convenience factor for video gaming is a significant factor that drives that revenue. You know, finally, and the fourth point I'd make is that, you know, the introduction of a competing game type would probably have ramifications on an RFP process for a casino in Chicago. You know, namely that if you're a bidder for a Chicago casino, you know, having a very competitive a peer that I'd be going up against would in all likelihood cause a bidder to, drastically or dramatically lower the amount of capital they would be willing to expend, and also that would result in a much smaller casino and therefore significantly lower job creation and tax benefits flowing from that. That concludes my prepared remarks, and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Govertson. Before we jump into questions, and I'll have Alderman Cardenas, Alderman Scott, and then Alderman Thompson. We have Ms. Tennille Jackson, and she's going to speak to us first. Ms. Jackson, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Wagasback and the entire Committee on Finance. My name is Tennille Jackson, and I am the Executive Director and founder of the National Association of Promotional Retailers. The NAPR acts as an industry trade organization to facilitate minority participation in newly established industries, including sweepstakes, the subject matter of today's panel, and to close the gap between our minority members and industry leaders. The NAPR understands the challenges unique to Black and Brown small business owners. Our members include bars, taverns, restaurants, convenience stores, packaged goods stores, gas stations, barbershops, car washes, and other small retail outlets. The NAPR understands the hurdles, limitations, and inaccessibility to resources that keep our businesses liquid, solvent, and most importantly, successful by general market definition. With that understanding comes NAPR's motivation to actively seek ways to bring about sustainable change within the small Black and Brown-owned business community. Specifically, Black and Brown-owned businesses face a different set of challenges that frequently involve, but are not limited to, incomplete paperwork, unfiled taxes, overdue bills, untrained staff that holds them back from progress, underdeveloped neighborhoods with socioeconomic challenges, limited understanding of the digital ecosystem, and basically non-existent relationships with people who have actual resources. The National Association of Promotional Retailers acknowledges the gap and will work with key stakeholders, community leaders, and elected officials to identify business owners with potential for growth and long-term success. Membership and active participation with the NAPR will assist in closing the gap and eliminate the barriers small business owners face when seeking ways to enter, engage, and thrive in areas that will allow for an increase in revenue. One manner in which the NAPR seeks to assist small Black and Brown-owned businesses is through electronic product promotion kiosks, otherwise known as sweepstakes devices. At no cost of implementation and immediate revenue generation, sweepstakes devices and the NAPR will act as a gateway for our communities to respond to the recent challenges facing small business owners. I would now like to turn to NAPR's legal counsel to explain the sweepstakes proposal and revenue model. Following his remarks, I will read a statement into the record from some of NAPR's members. I will then respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you. If you could just state your name and title up.
Yes,
for the
Chair.
record.
Hello, my name is Corey Oranovitz. I'm a former legal counsel to the Illinois Gaming Board, a founding member of the International Masters of Gaming Lawyers, a founding member of the Gaming Law Review, former adjunct professor of gaming law at the UIC John Marshall Law School, and a former expert witness for the City of Chicago on matters pertaining to gaming and in particular video gambling. The NAPR is proposing that the city adopt an ordinance that transitions sweepstakes devices into a more structured environment, one that maintains the integrity of the activity while generating revenues for the city. The proposal amends the municipal code. It provides for restrictions related to the operation of sweepstakes devices, provides that no sweepstakes device shall connect to the internet consistent with state law, provides that sweepstakes device shall have a fill system for purposes of generating a revenue operation fee payable to the city. It makes it unlawful for any person to operate a kiosk where the sale of a product is not a bona fide product. It provides that a bona fide product does not include discount coupons, internet access, a telephone card, a calling card, or a phone card. It provides that the city may impose an annual fee for each sweepstakes device in operation. Provides that in addition to the annual fee, the city shall impose a $1,000 revenue operation fee for each fill generated through the fill system. It makes other conforming changes. It requires operators of sweepstakes devices to register and obtain a fingerprint result and prohibit individuals with a gambling felony from operating sweepstakes devices. Further, it prohibits campaign contributions from the sweepstakes device operators, provides for a transition into VGTs, the state gaming program, and creates a preference for MBE, WB, and VBE businesses, and resets the date for what we call a use agreement related to video gaming terminals. The proposal requires no investment from the city. It requires no cost of implementation for small businesses. It will implement a structured regulated market and will generate between $37 million to $62 million annually for the city. The city will generate revenue 30 days following the effective date of the ordinance. And under the proposal, the city can also be the location and receive an additional 32% of the revenue, as well as generate revenue through a digital advertising space on the external monitor. Thank you.
We, the NAPR members, are small business owners in the city of Chicago. We support additional income and sources of revenue that do not require a capital investment. We are in need of additional revenue without a cost of implementation in order to keep our businesses open, retain employees, and provide services to our communities and comply with the COVID-19 protocol and restrictions. We strongly urge the city to embrace this opportunity that will empower small Black and Brown-owned businesses, and we are proud members of the NAPR. Sweepstakes devices, just like any other sweepstakes, think McDonald's, think Jewel, it's a socially acceptable activity. It's lawful under state law as confirmed by the courts and as a result, politically palatable. Pushback is driven by those who are selfishly protecting their own wealth and are restricted from openly operating for fear of regulatory reaction. Sweepstakes devices have been registered with the Illinois Department of Regulation for several years and have generated fees for the state. With additional clarity consistent with the proposed amendment, the integrity of this advancement in technology would continue to benefit small businesses, Black and Brown-owned sweepstakes operators and distributors, VGT operators, and the city. NAPR stands with its Black and Brown-owned small businesses desperately looking to return to normal, looking for additional revenues in a COVID environment, and given a chance to compete. I look forward to your questions.
All right, thanks, Ms. Jackson. Alderman Cardenas, then Scott and Thompson, and this is on specific to gaming questions. Thank you. Alderman Cardenas.
Thank you, Chairman. And this is for Jenny, the CFO, on casino in video gaming. I do believe casino is the way to go, and I think the gentleman that spoke about the different outcomes of going through with a casino a business initiative versus video gaming. I think he eloquently put it. I would go with casino, but Jenny, can you talk about what is the city's not just position but aim at getting going on a casino, temporary, otherwise, and at what capacity at this point, given the fact that we have COVID, and we would be at a 50% capacity, I guess, to some extent. What would that mean and how quickly? And then you can second that with the Fed talked about creating a lending facility for municipal governments. And how can we tie the two together to be able to access that liquidity, tying it to some sort of gaming operations?
Sure. As it relates to the gaming facility, what I would say, and Union Gaming actually put out a study with some recommendations around timing, which are fairly consistent with some of our thoughts, which is that we are going to monitor the market, see how it is that the casinos are reopening. And so far, it looks like it's been better than expected, although certainly they've been challenged just as much as any other industry. And then as we monitor that market, see it return back to a position where the casinos can start looking to future developments, initiate an RFP process that would allow us to select an operator. That would be sometime next year. Monitoring of where the casino market is on a day-to-day basis. And so we'll have to see how we move through COVID. But as we move through that, we are contemplating a temporary casino. It was a part of the RFI that was issued, which would in theory generate more revenues more quickly for the city to be able to start having that impact our bottom line. As it relates to casino operations and the discussion we're having here, as I mentioned in my comments, a casino would generate hundreds of millions of dollars annually for the city. The impact of that is significant. As you all know, our overall budget's $4.5 billion. And when we talk about where our structural gap is, which is significantly less than the $1.2 billion we're facing this year, about $783 million of that $1.2 billion is due to revenue loss from COVID specifically. A casino would generate enough revenues for us to make meaningful progress towards that long-term structural balance. And so when we talk about overall revenue streams for the city, it's clearly a focus for the city. The city's been looking to secure a casino for decades. And now we finally have state authority to do that. We want to make sure that we do this right and that we are taking the best advantage we can of this opportunity. In addition to the revenues, let's not forget that a casino would also generate thousands of jobs and would also create economic development within the city and help us to, spur other development in and around the casino area. And so all things that we should just consider as we're thinking about this development. As it relates to liquidity, we are looking at ways that we can try to bridge what is currently a very painful budget and create that bridge to those longer term revenues. It will be years before a permanent casino is fully built. And so obviously we have to plan for it, we have to move forward, and it's something we are working towards. But we also need to find ways to build that bridge to that long-term revenue stream. And that's a lot of what the conversations we're having now are related to. And probably broader than the current landscape of the specific revenue streams we're talking here today, but a part of the broader discussion related to the 2021 budget that we'll have in mid-October.
So the Fed facility is a possibility. I know that they talked about it. Are you confirming that? And if so, what's the range of the facility that would be put together? And I'm just thinking in terms of, our ability to look for, you talked about revenue sources. To me is more aligning our costs to our new realities of business. We came out of the 2008 financial crisis. Pretty much even. We had to sell assets, as Alderman Michelle Smith mentioned that, but we never really realigned costs with realities on the ground in terms of how much revenue we generated, how much cost we generated every year. And this is the time to do it. This is the time to realign those costs so that that long-term curve, pairs up with our revenues. But talk about the facility, because we want to be able to see how much that's going to be for the overall plug-in number that we need to get to, and so we can lessen the pain on potential layoffs, if we will.
Sure. So the municipal liquidity facility is borrowing that the city is able to implement to help with liquidity in the short term. Ultimately, it has to be repaid. But I think the broader point about the facility is that whether it's the municipal liquidity facility itself or borrowing in general, both short term and long term, is that borrowing borrowing by nature is a one-time solution. Borrowing to address one-time solutions, may be a part of what we're facing here today in order to build bridges to long-term structural balance. It may be the facility, it may be, just in essence going to the markets directly. What the facility provides to municipal issuers is in essence a guaranteed rate that you can access for a certain amount, but to the extent that we as a city have great market access, as we are in the market right now for some O'Hare refinancing bonds, if we're able to secure a better rate, then it may be that we may take that rate outside of the facility itself. We're still looking into the details of that and how we might structure that. I think probably to your broader point about the facility, we are taking a look at, certain bridges that we can build to long-term structural balance. But as the mayor has said often, structural balance is very important for us. Even as we're in the midst of this crisis, looking at how we bridge a $1.2 billion gap, we also are very mindful of crafting a long-term plan to achieve that structural balance. We did that last year, and that plan was affirmed by all of the rating agencies, as well as some of the key financial stakeholders, including the Civic Federation. We're still mindful of that, and we're looking in sort of all corners to be able to achieve that, including on the expense side, as you noted. But in the interim, we know that $1.2 billion on a $4.5 billion budget gap is a very, very large gap, and that there are some bridges that we're going to have to build in order to make our way to what that structural balance is. And importantly, identifying what those other solutions are now today, so that we can put together a financial plan that is comprehensive and that we know that we can achieve.
Thank you. I'll end with this because I know there's questions. Other people have questions. Are you doing an asset review right now? I mean, obviously, casino is going to be one of our strongest assets going forward. But if you could talk a little bit about that and what that's going to look like, that could yield some quick plug-in numbers for us. Where are you at in that process?
So we are taking a look at high-value surplus assets of the city and have conducted a review in that respect. I would like to clarify for most, and I've said this publicly, we aren't looking at, as Alderman Smith mentioned, large asset sales of the city in the midst of this crisis. But certainly there are still a number of high-value surplus assets of the city that we're taking a look at as well.
Thank you.
Thanks. Alderman Scott. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, question to the comptroller really quickly. Did I hear you say something about a temporary casino? What would be a timeline on something like that?
It really depends. We are looking to go out with an RFP next year, which is still tenuous because we're again monitoring how the market's recovering post-COVID. And then to the extent that we are able to issue that RFP, it takes several months to be able to secure that RFP. Post the securing of that RFP, we would need to gain city council approval. We would need to get the proposed operator approved by the IGB as well, the Illinois Gaming Board. And then after that, then, would enter into an agreement with an operator to be able to begin, construction on, either or a temporary and permanent casino. And so, it's too early to tell exactly what the timeline of that is, but that ultimately is the process for how we would move forward in developing a casino.
And so 2 questions about that. Will we be taking into consideration COVID and how, if we can't gather, we're not as liberal as a Vegas. So, we won't have the amount of people if COVID is still going, and is that taken into account? And then 2, with that operator, I know you said it may be permanent or it may be just for temporary. How would that work? Would we put out an RFP saying that, hey, you could potentially be the long-term casino license holder, or how is that going to work?
Sure. Under the statute, it's currently 1 license. So the RFP would be both for the temporary and the permanent casino.
Okay, thanks. So how and this may be a question for all 3, but how would sweepstakes, because what I understand that I heard in this conversation is sweepstakes is something that is immediate. Not only is sweepstakes help the city, it helps small local businesses that are suffering from liquidity in Black and brown neighborhoods. So how would potentially putting in an ordinance, how would that hinder a casino short-term and long-term?
So I could start, and then I might turn it over to Grant Govertson, who I know has done a lot of work in this respect, and not just in Illinois, but in other states. When you think about the Illinois market, the number one thing we hear from operators is that the Illinois market, by and large, is fairly saturated. There are, before the most recent expansion, 10 casinos that operate within the state, and that we have a number of casinos that operate in Indiana as well, just across the border. And so as we were, having discussions even before the most recent legislation about adjusting the tax rate to a level that we felt would be competitive and that we would be able to in fact secure a casino, it's something that we hear often. What I think we want to be mindful of as we're moving through this is is some of the concerns around that. We want to make sure we're able to to attract tier 1 operators and operators who can really make a footprint and change to what we're seeing in terms of development in Chicago, and ultimately be able to spur economic development. And so we mostly just want to be mindful of the fact that it is very competitive, and that whatever we can do to help support the ultimate development of a casino and getting that right, is just very important because of the ultimate revenues that come from that. And we've cleared one of the major hurdles related to securing a casino. It's been really the #1 hurdle that has prevented us from moving forward. At this point, now that we've secured the legislation, have that ability to, really get the process moving now.
Ms. Jackson or Mr. Govertson, if you'd like to respond to that too.
At the end of the day, sweepstakes is not gaming, it's promotions. So that's really important, and it provides an opportunity for there to be immediate income. So while we're talking about the length of time that it's going to take to ramp up and to roll out, what we know about sweepstakes is it's legal, it's lawful, and it's now, and it can be now.
And can you again talk about the immediate revenues, if you could, just so my colleagues kind of know what that is, immediate?
Absolutely. And I'm going to turn it over to Corey because he can break that down.
Thank you very much. So our proposal could generate anywhere between $37.5 million to $62.5 million annually, depending on the number of kiosks that are within the marketplace. To use Union's numbers, on a $300 million annual income, where I believe he cited VGT tax to the city would be about 17 million. Under those same numbers, our projections show that the city would generate $37.5 million. And sweepstakes, as Ms. Jackson has already said, is a lawful activity. It's been lawful in the state since January 2014. We are trying to transition the market so that the city can realize a benefit, and small businesses can also realize a benefit without fearing that they're somehow doing something improper. And the reason that businesses feel that way is because there's been no clear policy. While the law is on our side, it's very difficult to educate small businesses that they're able to do this type of activity. But the fact is, we've been working with the Illinois Department of Revenue, placing an emblem on the kiosk statewide, and we're trying to transition to allow these businesses to generate additional revenue on their end. Immediately, we can have these kiosks in the marketplace within 30 days, the city receiving revenue within 30 days, and the city would be able to place an emblem on the kiosk to show and demonstrate that in fact it's embraced. And as discussed earlier, dealing with some of the aldermen, dealing with how to control costs, there is no cost for implementation. The city already has an online portal. We would be able to integrate into that portal, be able to take the responsibility for the collection and the remittance of these fees on a basis that is deemed appropriate from the city. In addition, all of the submissions are auditable. The technology allows for an auditable process. And so the city would should feel that this is a compliant manner in which to put small businesses back into play, generating additional revenue without cost of implementation while being asked to operate at a reduced capacity.
Mr. Govertson, could you respond to that too? And I think Mr. Masal wanted to respond to that question as well.
Oh, I just wanted to ask a question, if he could perhaps give an example of what city has generated $37 million under these type of activities, or if there are a couple cities that have been successful with generating anywhere near that level of money. from.
Yeah, no,
And then my last would be, and how these kiosks would be different than a different market than perhaps the lottery terminals that are available in stores and things right now?
no, those are great questions. So the technology is adaptable depending on which market the games are being operated. In Pennsylvania, they are generating in excess of closer to 100 million annually. They just have a larger footprint and have had a way to generate income for the state longer than Illinois. And in Virginia, I believe that they are generating close to $60 million annually. The reason that we're not able to give you any sort of revenue for cities in Chicago is because while this activity is lawful under state law, we have not passed any municipal ordinances to generate fees for the city. Up until this point, we've had challenges with regard to the legality of the activity in the city, and those cases the city was not able to meet their burden. So the municipal ordinances do not cover the activity, and so they operate now without any sort of benefit to the city. And not enough small businesses are generating the benefit because there is misinformation within the marketplace. So what we're trying to do is put in reasonable restrictions, make it plain and clear to business owners, and generate a fee for the city.
Thanks for that. Mr. Govertson, did you want to respond, or can I go to the?
No, I'd like
go ahead
to,
and respond. Yep. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you.
Then I'll go to Alderman Thompson after you respond.
Okay. Thank you. So what I would, what I'd mention is as Ms. Bennett said, the tax rate on the City of Chicago casino has been lowered, and in our view, it is lowered enough that it would attract interest from the part of these first-tier international gaming developers. Hundreds of millions, if not maybe billions of dollars of capital would be expended on this casino. When you think about the upcoming RFP, which would likely come next year, as Ms. Bennett mentioned, having a competitive game type, in this case sweepstakes, whether it's gaming or quasi-gaming, it's two sides of the same coin. Any major developer would instantly have second thoughts about putting that money to work in the Chicagoland market if a competing gaming type was introduced, at the same time or in advance of the RFP. My concern then would be literally a busted RFP in that case.
Before Alderman Thompson, before you go, Alderman Scott, I think, had a follow-up question there.
Yes, I did. Wanted to follow up with, do we know about how many of these games? Because from what I understand from the conversation is that these machines are already in establishments within the city and within the state. Do we know about how many are in the city right now? And I think I heard that we can't get an estimation on how much money they bring in because they're not licensed, and we just don't know. So they could be bringing in a sizable amount. We just don't know what that is. Can I get a response from either three of them? I think it goes more towards the sweepstakes.
Yeah, thanks, Alderman. That's a great question. So we feel that there are close to 1,000 to 1,500 kiosks throughout the state. The bulk of those would be within the city limits now. Right now, those kiosks simply have a $30 tax emblem from Illinois Department of Revenue on each of those devices. So we're able to project through the technology and how the software operates what those machines or those devices generate. That's how we came up with the revenue model that we have already submitted to the city. It's part of your packet, which deals with revenues that get to that $37 to $62 million annually, depending on the number of kiosks that are in the marketplace. So we have a little bit of historical data simply from monitoring those kiosks that are in operation now. And again, with regard to Union Gaming, I would just say that in no market, Pennsylvania is a very large gaming casino market. They have a game of skill. It's a variation of the sweepstakes device that we have now. And what it has done is enhanced the market for casino because the product is different. Casino product is just simply different than a promotional sweepstakes. It's almost like saying Publishers Clearinghouse or McDonald's Twist a Cap or Coca-Cola Twist a Cap or McDonald's Monopoly is somehow going to impact the ability to get a true RFP to come back to the city. The reality is your RFP is going to be $1 billion Las Vegas style project that's going to have a few goals. One is to stop the flow of traffic and gambling dollars, which are going to Indiana. It's going to create additional hotel and non-gaming amenities to increase and bolster tourism and convention. And it's going to try and keep your higher end gamblers that are now going to rivers and potentially some of the racetracks to stay within the city limits. It's like comparing apples and oranges. This is a promotional device, and it's not really quasi-gambling. It's actually expressly exempted from the definition of gambling under state law.
All right.
Alderman Scott.
This is the last question, I think, Chairman. So one, just to follow up, what I hear is that folks can have these sweepstakes machines anyway without some kind of regulation of them. They can do it anyway. So we would lose that money, and there still may be a problem if there was an RFP put out. But lastly, I want to talk about equity. We've talked about equity in this conversation several times. Want to know about the plans for equity in a potential casino, and then the plans for equity with the sweepstakes machines. How are folks of color, specifically African Americans, able to benefit from casino and thanks.
So I could start as it relates to the casino. Many cities who have built casinos have created minority targets as it relates to hiring, and in particular residency requirements as it relates to hiring. And so as the city continues to develop its casino plans, it would do the same. And then in addition to that, as it relates to overall equity, how it is that we take those revenues and apply that and the values that we express in the budgets that we pass, that's ultimately our greatest expression of equity to the tune of $4.5 billion. And so I think that, and this applies to really every single one of the revenue conversations we've been having, but, how we bring in the revenues is just as important as how we spend the revenues, if not more importantly, how we spend the revenues and making sure that those expressions of equity are realized in how it is that those revenues are spent.
Alderman.
Yeah, can I have that from gaming if possible? Sorry, sweepstakes. The sweepstakes. I apologize. Sweepstakes.
Okay.
Sorry.
I knew not to answer. Yes. So with us and with sweepstakes, we have an amazing opportunity to provide that bridge that's being referenced to the Black and Brown communities. Again, no cost of implementation is the biggest asset right now that all business owners need, but specifically with the Black and Brown communities. That's one of the most important things that we have to understand and recognize is needed. With this opportunity, that's also already lawful. This provides an income revenue generating opportunity for Black and Brown businesses specifically. And that's really the main purpose of the NAPR. NAPR's role is to make sure that we are transitioning our Black and Brown owned businesses to a point of longer term success, not just right now, but for the longer term. That's essentially what our proposed ordinance provides.
Thank you. Mr. Govertson, did you want to answer that, or is that?
I think that would fall to, casino developers, and so of which I'm not. So I'll pass on that one.
Okay. Well, let me move on to Alderman Thompson then, if I could. Alderman Thompson, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh, you're on. Okay. You're on video. Okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was able to log on. Thanks, Chair. I appreciate it. So, this is something I prefer. I've had conversations in the past with previous administration as well. But it's just, I can't get answers, so I have to do it here in public. So and Jenny knows that the question that's going to come is as it relates to video poker. You know, we have an opportunity here. It's not just gaming, and I would like to hear from Mr. Governson about his take, because I think he even talked about these are two different gaming, casino and video poker, and it's two different sort of target markets. I think the folks that, you know, the video poker, and I'd like to learn more about the sweepstakes, because I think that's another opportunity, again, that helps the neighborhoods. And this is more of a neighborhood alive program, or Chicago Alive program, where a lot of our taverns and restaurants, especially now with COVID, but even before COVID, a lot of these places were struggling. And you know, to allow for poker machines, video poker, it will not only help with creating some additional revenue for the city of Chicago and for these businesses, but also helps them reinvest in their own businesses. And so I'd like to hear perhaps from Mr. Gummerson to make sure I heard that right when he was giving his opening remarks, if he also believes that they are two different markets.
Sure. Thank you. Oops, is this thing on? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that question. I would disagree. I do not believe that casinos and video gaming are necessarily two different markets. Generally, the customer is a casino customer in either case. It's just that the casino is a very small one, 5 or 6 machines, and is located in your neighborhood bar, rather than a large casino with 2,000. It's generally the same wallet that is being shared between the two. As I mentioned in my prepared remarks, look, the reality is in Illinois, video gaming has been, wildly successful in the eyes of the state in terms of tax receipts, no doubt about that, with video gaming revenues greater than casino revenue at this point. The issue for the city, the way we see it, is that the tax rates on those two gaming types are vastly different as it relates to what goes to the city at roughly 5.7% for video gaming versus 20% plus for casino gaming. So I think that's where the major difference lies, is just that 3.5 times greater tax rate that the city receives on casino gaming.
Okay, well, I hear you. That's an issue that we can bring up, and I've asked and suggested that we bring that up in Springfield as well. That can be changed. There's 7,180 liquor licenses or establishments that have poker machines, which you're allowed up to 5, but there's 7,180 in the state of Illinois, exclusive of Chicago. Chicago has 6,082 liquor licenses. I would venture to say, and I've had conversations with some of the folks that are involved with this, some of the lobby groups representing the poker machines. Yeah, if we go back and we increase the amount, take 5 points off the poker machine and 5 points off the establishment, so we reduce their cuts from 35 to 30, and give those 10 points, add that to the 5.7 that the municipalities throughout the state of Illinois get in order to open up that casino, or open up those establishments in the city of Chicago, they would be willing to do that, as well as perhaps increase the max bet. We did increase this last session, the max bet. That was a suggestion I had a few years back as well. But to do that, that's going to help the neighborhoods and the establishments throughout our neighborhoods and throughout our suburbs. So yeah, under the current structure, but we just went to Springfield and changed the structure for a casino in the city of Chicago. We could do the same to increase the amounts for all of the communities, not just Chicago, but every municipality should increase from the 5% up to the 15%. What's your thought on that?
So I certainly understand that. I think the issue there, and again, going back to my prepared remarks, introducing that competitive game type which is obviously very competitive, as we see in the Illinois as a whole numbers. When you look at video versus casino, you want, it's all going to boil down to, do you want participation from a casino operator or not? A casino operator is highly unlikely to participate in an RFP where there's a highly competitive game type, especially given the prevailing tax rate. I think it's good enough as is to attract a credible bidder. If you throw in video on top of that, I think it might be a bridge too far for the major international operators, again, who are making it through the COVID environment. But certainly the reality is a lot different than it was. And so, you want the balance sheets to be in a good shape for these tier one operators. They're getting there. We're seeing decent gaming revenues across both video and casino in Illinois, as these properties reopen. So the industry does seem to be, getting its feet under it again. But really, it's just going to come down to what would the interest in an RFP be with significant expansion of gaming, around the same time of the RFP. I would imagine that most casinos would, virtually all casino operators would probably decline to participate.
I think we can agree to disagree. Every municipality that has a casino right now in the state of Illinois also has video poker. I highly disagree. I can tell you that folks, my neighbors and my establishments here, and the people that drink with those, won't be running downtown to a casino every night. They will stop at the neighborhood tavern. They'll have a couple of beers and maybe play poker. And maybe occasionally they would go downtown instead of going to Vegas or up to Rivers. But I think you're talking about, apples and oranges here. I would venture to say that that's different. And as far as what today, I don't think we can price a casino based on COVID numbers. I think that's ridiculous. Based on historical, and if we have to give a short-term credit for the COVID until it gets back to a number, then we have to adjust based on that. But I don't think we could be making any long-term plans for a casino based on the current economic challenges that we face with the pandemic going on and the social turmoil. That too will pass. I think we can agree to disagree, because I think if you look at all the other casinos in the state of Illinois, every single city has poker machines, and it seems to operate. You mentioned Peoria, with 47% of the people going to their neighborhood establishments and 53 going in to the casino. So I think they can both coexist, and I think they both should coexist. And as far as the sweepstakes, I think that's something we also need to look at. The fact of the matter is, I'm not a big gambler myself, but I think it's something that we have to look at as options. Those are choices people make, and we have to be conscious of trying to get people addicted and the negative ramifications with some of these vices. But we also have to be cognizant of revenue other than property taxes and laying off services. So I think we have to. It's time is now to have that discussion. Time is not to have that discussion. And I would ask that we look at that in the veto session, to go down to Springfield and talk with the governor about trying to increase for all cities, not just treating Chicago differently, but all cities increase from 5 to 15%, and working with the operators and the tavern owners or establishment restaurants to allow that to happen. So no further
CFO,
questions.
Thank you. Let me move on to Alderman Moore. Alderman Moore, did you have a question specific to that?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, my first question, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay, good. Mr. Goverston, is it correct?
Yes, sir.
Where does the 58 million and 17 million comparison, is that a current number right now that's real, when you're saying 58 million for casino versus 17 million for the slot machines or video gaming? I'm sorry.
No, sir. That was just an example. And that just assumed, what if there was $300 million in casino revenue and $300 million in video revenue that existed in Chicago? What would the tax receipts on each be at the statutory tax rates? It was just an example.
Okay, and so is that $300 million number? If we had a casino here, is that some projections you did, or you just threw out that number as an example?
No, it's from our feasibility study that we did last year, we forecast a casino at the highest performing of the 5 sites would generate approximately $800 million in gaming revenue. So this is just an example. In all likelihood, it would be somewhat higher than $300 million each, but it wouldn't be $800 million each, for example, if that makes sense.
Okay, it does. And CFO, I think for me, this is more of a statement in terms of, as we look in our communities, and it's something related to what Alderman Patrick Thompson was talking about, but also making sure whether we have the casino and if we have the video gaming, is that video gaming I look at, and I spoke to Ms. Jackson and her team before, it has to have, for me, have to have that equity lens. It just can't be, people have ownership of video gaming and being in our communities the way it's set up now. And when you're talking about having some liquidity in local businesses, most of the local businesses are not Black-owned businesses where this liquidity is an issue. If it's an issue, it's these corner stores that sometimes even generate additional problems. So what I would say is that if we're going to increase that, it has to have an equity lens, but also from a community standpoint, if it is in like bars, which I tend to be owned by the people in the community, or either a specialty place, but just to have them in all grocery stores, gas stations, and all of that, where the sweepstakes are now, presents some challenges to us. And it's something that we have to look at, CFO, as if we're going to be rolling any, especially video gaming out, because there's a cost to, there's a human capital cost, both economically and socially, and from a crime standpoint, that I'm seeing in some of our neighborhoods as it relates to this. And so as we look at it and try to find that balance, CFO, we have to take those things into consideration.
Thank you, Alderman.
Ms. Bennett, go ahead.
If I may, I just had a couple comments, both to Alderman Moore's comments as well as previous comments. As it relates to the equity lens, I understand the importance, and we all do understand the importance of making sure we are addressing the historical inequities of investments in the city. My concern here is that, when you're talking about a $12 to $15 million revenue stream versus a $200 million revenue stream, that's a heck of a lot of equity that we're not able to apply if it is that we see a cannibalization effect on the casino revenues. And and generating that 200 million in revenues has a lot more, gives us a lot more flexibility to be able to have the financial wherewithal to be able to apply investments in other places, which this body decides upon. And so, at the end of the day, it comes down to the money and, and how much we can generate in order to help address our financial issues. Then there's been some question about whether it's 15 million or can you go back to the legislature and adjust the revenues, or alternatively, if there are more machines that you assume, maybe it's a little bit higher than the 15 million. Regardless, even if you increase the revenues threefold from say 5 to 15%, you're talking, instead of 15 million, you're talking 45 million, which is still a lot less than 200 million. And so mostly, we want to make sure, like I said, we get this right. My understanding is that the first time the city of Chicago started floating a casino was sometime in the early 90s. And now we have finally the state authorization to be able to do this. Getting to that place where we're generating revenues, and importantly, the thousands of jobs that come with this, and importantly, the economic development benefits, is of critical importance. And a lot has gone into getting us to this place. not just in this administration, but in previous ones as well, and moving the ball forward around this discussion. And so, I mostly just want to reemphasize that we don't want, to put that at risk, because as Union Gaming has noted about the, operator interest. As it relates to other towns, very few other towns are, in a place where they are looking to secure a marquee operator like the city of Chicago can. We are the third largest city in the country. We are the largest city in the country that doesn't have gaming operations where it in fact is legal. And so it's an enormous opportunity that we have in order to be able to tap this untapped market. And so we want to make sure that that pristine opportunity is one that we're taking most advantage of. And if, even if, you don't believe in the cannibalization effects, I would, suggest that, you take a look at the report that's been put out by the state related to gaming. And, all you have to do is look at the historical gaming revenues, how that's trended versus the trending of video gaming in the state, to see, exactly how it is that those markets are in fact tied. And the trending is, is correlated pretty closely. And so, mostly to say, I think there's a way for us to be able to achieve, our equity goals, in particular for businesses in the neighborhood, especially with some of the comments that Alderman Moore made about, how it is that, there are additional impacts associated with, certain of these terminals, on top of, the fact that we are trying to generate as much revenues as we can in this very difficult time frame to, be able to address some of these issues. And just to reiterate, we want to make sure we get this process done right.
Chairman Wagner.
Thanks, CFO. Yeah, jump in there. And before you start, I just want to get the head tax panelists ready. Mr. Bauer, Mr. Lavin, Mr. Carr, and Mr. Toyer are going to speak to the head tax next, but go ahead and wrap up that question there.
Thank you. I think that you can do all of these things. What we have seen as it relates to video gambling is some of your larger companies, Delaware North, Penn National Gaming, Boyd Gaming, they have now gotten into the video gaming route. They also own casinos within the state. I also think that some of our casinos did not reinvest in their properties such that when video gaming came, it was new and it was shiny and more convenient. And the casinos themselves got caught without reinvestment. A casino in Chicago is going to be a major destination resort. It's not going to cannibalize its own citizenry. It's going to look towards getting revenue from conventioneers, tourism, and stop the flow of traffic that's already going to Indiana. Adding sweepstakes or video gaming will only enhance the numbers for the casino because it's going to engage additional new folks into the marketplace. The city of Chicago process is going to be long. It's going to be arduous. You will see casinos open up in Waukegan and the south suburbs prior to the city of Chicago. The vetting process and the time it's going to take to actually go live will be years. And as it relates to video gambling, it'll take you, if you were to start today, it would take you somewhere between 18 months and 24 months to get that going. I represent locations and operators that participate in video gambling. So I understand the timeline. Sweepstakes is here. And what's beautiful about the NAPR is the fact that they're going to allow small businesses to participate in an activity to generate additional income that they're not receiving from other sources today. And it'll generate income for the city today. And NAPR is going to then use their platform to educate folks to make them more compliant so they can transition into video gambling if and when the city were to embrace that. And now you'll have locations that could participate in video gambling as well as those that are not eligible for video gambling to maintain with sweepstakes. So in the end, the city will be able to capture a larger populace of those that want to engage in this type of discretionary activity.
Thank you. The question was actually for Alderman Scott, though. Did you have a follow-up question, or did I miss it in the midst of that?
So I had a point of information. I forgot the point of information.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll let Gil follow because I know Gil didn't go before me, but I did have a follow-up after Alderman Villegas, if possible.
Yeah, that's fine. If you guys could make them pointed, that'd be great. I got the other head tax group waiting too. Go ahead. Gil.
Thank
Alderman
you.
Villegas.
Thank you, Chairman. and I want to thank the presenters as well. Is there any action that Springfield needs to take in order to take a look at the casino, putting a temporary casino up, or has that authority already been given to us? Because I see kind of an opportunity here where if we do need to go down to Springfield for action to take a look at incorporating some other things, but I know that right now the hotel industry is hurting big time, and I think that if there's an opportunity to include slots or positions at some of the hotels as interim while we're building this facility, it would be a win-win situation where, again, some of the hotels could utilize some of their current facilities to have this casinos there while we're building the big one that we're trying to build here.
Sure.
So could you elaborate on that, CFO Bennett?
Sure. The casino, we don't need additional authority from the state to implement a temporary casino. The only constraining factor there is that only one license can be issued for both the temporary and the permanent. So whatever operator we decide to go with for either the temporary would have to be the same operator for the permanent, and we'd go to the IGB to seek approval for that operator at the same time.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that there's a lot more things, but let me just say this too. As we're thinking about revenue, one of the things that we as a council need to think about is demanding that the LGDF that we in Springfield, that we've gone from 10% down to 6%. And for those that don't know, that's the local share of income tax, that we've lost 4% over the last decade. We need to make a point that as we're being lobbied, for lack of a better word, on some of this fair tax and et cetera, that Chicago needs to get back to the 10% rate that we've always had, so that way we can make sure that's another tool in trying to address the budget deficit that we've seen over the past 5 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Gil. Chair, Alderman Scott, point of information.
Really quickly, we talked about equity, and I appreciate the conversation that if we have more money, we have more money to invest. If we have a greater piece of the pie, we can distribute that out into the communities. We missed the ball on marijuana in terms of equity and ownership for folks of color, specifically African Americans. Want to know is there a plan for owner operation as it pertains to the casino? And then how does sweepstakes or video games kind of work in that? And then last part of that, if I'm not mistaken, if sweepstakes can let me know, there's an opportunity for if there is competition for whoever owns those licenses to buy out the sweepstakes, if I'm not mistaken, and how does that work? And then I'm done, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I can speak to the ownership piece. A lot of other cities have worked through ownership requirements as well as it relates to ensuring that there was minority representation in the ownership. And so, I don't know exactly where we would end up on that. I think it's going to be a function of how we see the RFP process move along, but it is something that we've seen occur in other places. And I think your second question was towards sweepstakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Sweepstakes, we definitely have plans to provide Black operator and distributor opportunities. And while there are no Black-owned VGT operators at the present moment, NAPR is definitely actively seeking and working with the community to establish that for reasons you just mentioned, Alderman Scott. There has been a challenge as it relates to the rollout of the cannabis. So we're looking to provide opportunities in that arena as it relates to simply income revenue and generating opportunities. So absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Alderman Scott. Thank you, everyone, for that robust discussion there. I'm sure we'll be revisiting it over the next few weeks. I want to thank our panelists for coming out today to discuss it. And again, if any aldermen have any questions, I'm sure you can either do them through the chair or reach out to them directly, and I'm sure they would provide the answers. So finally, I want to move over to the head tax discussion. And I also wanted to mention that we have Mike Jacobson from the Hotel Association. I had him at a different part of my notes, but he will be one of our panelists as well. So we will hear from Randy Bauer, Jack Lavin, Rob Carr from Retailers, and Sam Toya and Mike Jacobson. Randy, why don't you go ahead and start, please?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As it relates
and
to,
thank you for, Randy, thank you for staying on the whole time and listening to the discussion. Appreciate it.
It's an interesting discussion. So head taxes, there's a significant amount of variation how they're constructed around the country. In general, it's a form of a per capita tax. It's charged per person rather than on income or earnings. They're generally assessed on the business, and sometimes it's a flat amount per year. More often, it's charged on a monthly basis. There can be exemptions. So in the case of the state of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, which has a local services tax, their version of a head tax, the first $12,000 of income is exempt. And sometimes there are also exclusions. There may be certain types of businesses that it does not apply to. When we were talking about tax principles, it's an employee, a per employee tax. So there are some horizontal equity issues. Businesses that require more employees just to be able to do what they do, or those that choose to substitute more labor as opposed to capital, are going to pay more tax as it relates to their total bill. It's also an issue that some portion of taxes that are business taxes get passed along to employees in the form of lower wages. The tax is a larger percentage of overall wages for lower paid employees. So for them, that's going to be a vertical issue, equity issue as well. Most of the head taxes are fairly small dollar amounts. Generally, they're around $50 an employee at the high end. So the counter argument to the equity arguments is that it's really a de minimis amount. That kind of explains why larger dollar value amounts have run into controversy. The most notable is Seattle, where they had a $275 per employee tax that was only charged on businesses with over $20 million of revenue. That was seen as too large an amount and may impact on some of those kinds of equity issues. The tax can be structured with or without exemptions. Obviously, from a tax administrative angle, it's easier to administer if there are fewer exemptions or exclusions. And certainly that's the case too for employers. Although in general, again, if you're talking small dollar amounts, it's probably not that big a deal. From a policy perspective, it's not used in a lot of cities. It is used a lot in Pennsylvania, where you have over 1,200 municipalities that apply it. The largest cities that apply, the largest that applies a straight head tax is probably Denver. It's been in place there a long time. It's understood. I don't think it's going to go away there. And there's some other Colorado cities as well. The city of San Diego has a similar kind of tax. They charge a business license that is $34 for businesses a year, just total for businesses that are 12 employees or less. And then it's $125 license plus $5 per employee for businesses a year of over 13 employees or more. So that then becomes, in essence, a head tax for businesses of over 12 employees. Pennsylvania is, as a state, probably provides more local tax alternatives than most states, so it's not surprising that they use a lot of this type of tax. They even have the option for local governments of assessing an occupational tax, which is leveled at different rates depending on one's occupation and the choice that's made in the community. That's probably an example of a tax that probably shouldn't be replicated elsewhere. I'll leave that as my remarks.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to Jack Lavin from the Chicagoland Chamber.
Great, thank you, Chairman Wagaspack and members of the Finance Committee. My name is Jack Lavin, President and CEO of the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce. Chicagoland Chamber represents the depth and breadth of the business community, from Fortune 100 to your neighborhood entrepreneur. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today regarding a very challenging budget-making process. There are no easy solutions here, Shared sacrifice from the business community, from labor organizations and the public sector will be needed. We stand ready to work with you and your colleagues towards productive solutions that do not hinder the economic recovery and growth our businesses, workers, and residents desperately need. Before I get to the head tax proposal, I did want to comment on a previous panel regarding the so-called LaSalle Street tax or financial transaction tax. The Chamber is strongly opposed to a financial transactions tax. Companies like CME provide major economic benefits and jobs to Chicago and the entire Midwest. This industry also generates significant revenues for the state and local governments that are needed now more than ever. With the ever-increasing capabilities of today's technologies, the financial industry is highly mobile. They can locate anywhere. In a highly competitive industry, market activity would almost certainly shift away to jurisdictions that do not impose such a tax, like the suburbs or neighboring states. We cannot let that happen here, especially now. I also respectfully urge you not to consider reinstating a head tax or an employer expense tax, which, as you know, was phased out under the previous administration because of its crippling impact on job creation and growth and disincentive to add jobs. Businesses across the city of Chicago have been decimated by the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, so much so that every day more businesses announce they are closing their doors for good. This means small business owners who have poured everything they have into their businesses, many losing their life savings, and our residents who are facing layoffs and furloughs. Reinstating the head tax on our businesses would not only hamper growth, but would be yet another nail in the coffin for the struggling business community. This year alone, Chicago businesses have seen higher property taxes, an increase in the starting wage, and implementation of a scheduling ordinance, all at a time when many lost out on months of revenue, now face strict capacity limits, and have seen severe reduction in sales, especially among the retail, restaurant, and the tourism and hospitality industries, which are most impacted by this tax. Creating new costly policies for businesses are not conducive to rebuilding a strong Chicago with a 12.6 unemployment rate, much higher than the national average. Additionally, particularly as we see an increasing shift to remote working, a head tax would incentivize companies to leave Chicago to go to the suburbs or neighboring states where this tax doesn't exist. It is seen as an instant non-starter or job killer for most companies and places a heavy burden on the companies that are subject to the tax. Business leaders like Ford assembly plant executives said just that years ago when the tax was in effect. Do we really want to jeopardize thousands of jobs and billions of dollars of investment from companies like Ford? For more than 10 years, as the former director of DCO and chief of staff to Governor Quinn, I helped attract or retain more than 500 companies to Illinois. I know what plays a factor in companies' decision making when deciding where to locate. And I can tell you a head tax is near the top of the biggest deterrents to facility relocations and expansions. It is the #1 argument made against Chicago when we compete with other cities or states. It is the symbolic sledgehammer used to say Chicago is not welcoming to business and jobs. The Chamber recently did a survey of nearly 500 employers, big and small, representing 93,000 workers. Less than half of the businesses expect to bring all employees back to work by 2021. Less than half. That has major ramifications for the Chicagoland economy. This is the strongest evidence that instead of placing additional costs on our businesses, more needs to be done to help them survive. I am urging aldermen to hold discussions that find real solutions and regulatory relief options that will help businesses stay afloat during this time. Only in doing that will we get people back to work. The Chamber and the business community look forward to working with you, your colleagues, and the mayor to that end. Thank you again for your time today. I'm happy to answer any questions as we go through the panel.
Thanks, Mr. Lavin. Next up, we'll have Mr. Carr, president of IRMA, and CEO and president, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the Finance Committee, Rob Carr, President and CEO of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association. Tanya Trish Dowwood had to go tend to childcare issues, so I am substituting for her this afternoon. So thank you for having me. Irma's obviously gravely concerned that there's even discussion of a head tax. It has a disproportionate impact on industries that are labor intensive, and certainly retail is. We represent retailers of all types and sizes, and those retailers of all types and sizes in every category are currently deciding today what the future looks like and how they're going to accommodate it, how they're going to try to position themselves to weather the next pandemic, or frankly, just get through this one. We're perplexed as to why we would even be considering a policy that discourages investment and growth in the city. It threatens to make permanent the status quo that we are experiencing today. It seems to also send a contradictory message. While on the one hand, the city wants to send a message, come back, invest, help us as we help you, and we'll help you. This seems to send a message to come back and we're going to figure out how to make your life difficult and tax you creatively. Any idea that doesn't lend to reinvestment in the city, to hiring in the city, to growth in the city should be set aside permanently. And we should be instead focusing our ideas together on how to get people to return to the city, to work every day, and the tourists to return to all 77 neighborhoods of the city. Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd be happy to answer questions at an appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Sam Toya is next. Sam, are you ready to go?
I'm here. Yes, I am.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify on this panel today. Again, my name is Sam Toya from the Illinois Restaurant Association. My colleagues on the panel have already expressed why the business community at large has deep concerns about the prospect of a head tax in Chicago, and why we commend the City Council for repealing the policy nearly 10 years ago. I also like to close our panel by sharing the perspective of Chicago restaurants. I want to share with you guys of Chicago's restaurant and bar owners on this topic. The restaurant and hospitality community of Chicago has been absolutely decimated by COVID-19. 78% of Illinois operators say they don't expect their restaurant sales to return to pre-coronavirus levels within the next 6 months. 55% of Illinois operators say it's unlikely their restaurants will still be in business 6 months from now if business conditions continue at the current rate. On average, Illinois restaurant operators say their current staffing levels are only 59% of what they would typically be in the absence of the coronavirus. Overall, 63% of Illinois restaurant operators do not expect their staffing levels to return to pre-coronavirus levels within the next 6 months. And right now, restaurants are only allowed to serve 1/4 of the number of people they normally would indoors due to occupancy limits. Even during normal times, 95 to 97 cents of every dollar that comes into a restaurant goes back into the food, employees, and everything else it goes with running a restaurant. So the numbers are incredibly bleak right now. Restaurant and bars that are the cornerstones of our 77 communities are struggling to hang on. Simply put, I cannot name a single tax or public policy that would be more detrimental to workforce development and economic expansion than a monthly employee head tax. We are all in the midst of fighting through a once-in-a-century pandemic that no one was prepared to handle. Nearly 80,000 people that work in the restaurant industry in Illinois are still unemployed. If we want to bring people back to work, the city should consider any and all tools to help make that happen. A head tax would have the exact opposite effect by putting businesses in a no-win situation of being punished for bringing their valued team members back to work. Operators in Chicago's hospitality industry are always ready and willing to make additional investments. I always say, we'd rather be at the table and on the menu. So we're here to help figure this out, and let's not put up roadblocks to opportunities for thousands of Chicagoans by instituting a regressive head tax on the Chicago business community. I'm here to answer any questions as we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks. And finally, we'll have Mike Jacobson from the Hotel Association.
Great. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Vice Chair Harrison. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this afternoon. You're going to hear some of what you've already heard from the other panelists, but really I don't have to tell you what you already know, but I'll spend a few minutes just kind of giving the state of the hotel industry. The hotel industry in the last 6 months has faced a catastrophe that we've never really seen in our lifetime. Hotels have been forced to fight for their survival while occupancy rates are still to this day in the 20% range throughout Chicago. While we welcome only a fraction of the guests that we typically would in a year, we're still responsible for our mounting mortgage and property tax payments. We just released a survey actually today that showed that half of all hotel owners, their loans are already in default. That's only 6 months into the pandemic. Needless to say, this is going to continue. Over half of our property owners are already in default and at risk of foreclosure. I think it was definitely newsworthy in our second largest hotel in the state and the city, obviously. The Palmer House got foreclosed a couple of weeks ago, and that is absolutely the first of many foreclosures that we'll see in the industry in the city here in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, hotels are still on the hook for property tax bills that amount to over $30,000 per day at many of our hotels. That's more than the amount of revenue that they're collecting on a daily basis. So the financial situation for most hotels in the city is already upside down. In the peak of COVID, more than 130 hotel jobs across Illinois were lost. Most of them still have not been rehired, and Chicago as a city significantly lags behind other cities throughout the state in terms of rehiring. We're seeing other cities, not just across the state of Illinois, but across the country, rebounding and rehiring far quicker than we're seeing hotels in the city of Chicago for several reasons. That same study I mentioned that was released today showed, similar to Sam's numbers in the restaurants, hotels are very similar, where 2/3 of all hotels won't survive the next 6 months unless the conditions dramatically improve or we don't get more support from various levels of government, not just the city, but also the state and the feds. Over the last several months, we've worked diligently with government agencies across the board, including CDPH, in terms of safely reopening and protecting and keeping healthy our employees and our guests. Obviously, that will always be our top priority, but that in itself carries costs associated with it as well. So we're definitely in dire straits as an industry. We were the first industry impacted by COVID in the early days of March when people started canceling conventions, when people started canceling their business trips. We are certainly going to be the last industry to recover from it. We don't anticipate recovering to our 2019 occupancy or revenue numbers until 2024 at the earliest. That said, there are glimmers of hope. Cities, as I mentioned, cities throughout the U.S. are seeing a modest uptick in occupancy and some signs of modest recovery. Unfortunately, the same can't be said of Chicago. The national occupancy rate is approaching 50% again, significantly behind where we should be at this time of year. But in the city of Chicago, we are still at 20%. 50% nationally. In Chicago, we're at 20%. So we have significant headwinds facing us, including arbitrary limitations on group sizes that we're working to try to overcome. But while that work continues, it's critical that the city resists any proposal that would further deter employers' quest to rehire their team members, such as the head tax. As we consider new revenues in the 2020 budget, please be mindful that the hospitality industry simply cannot endure any additional measures that would further contract the industry at this time. Navy Pier already closed for the winter. Hotels that have reopened have since closed down again, and we're starting to see more and more chatter around additional hotels that will shut their doors again for the winter. And our retailers, as Rob mentioned, have stated that our landmark shopping venues are hurting badly. The hotel industry is one of the largest economic engines in the city of Chicago. We're at the heart of economic development for the city. There was a conversation, the previous conversation around gaming, around equity. We are one of the largest employers in the city, particularly in Black and brown communities, with a starting wage of $18 an hour. But these are the wages and the jobs that have been shed during this pandemic. Even if a majority of our hotels are physically located downtown, our employees come from all the neighborhoods across the city, and the financial implications impact the entire city. I mentioned we're one of the largest tax generators for the city. The current hotel tax in Chicago is 17.5%. And without the tax revenue from hotels, each Chicago household would pay $1,650 each year more in taxes just to make up for our lost tax revenue. I think that's a sad reality that we're soon going to experience unless things change dramatically. We are going to see taxes increase across the board because of the lost tax revenue from hotels. So these hotel taxes not only support critical city services like education and public safety, we also help market the city, which leads to economic development, not just for tourists, but for residents and businesses to showcase who Chicagoans really are. So now is the time to help the hospitality industry in ways like supporting Choose Chicago's mission. The last thing we can afford is to further increase the financial burdens that are placed on hoteliers who are already at risk of losing their entire livelihoods. I'll finish with just one effort to dispel some misperceptions. Hotels, even if they have a Marriott or Hilton or Hyatt brand on them, each hotel is individually owned and operated. Many of our hotels are owned by individual owners located right here in Illinois. So these are people that have poured their life savings and their livelihoods into operating these hotels. If we do something to either help or harm the hotel industry, it doesn't impact the large mega corporations. It impacts Chicagoans and Illinoisans who own and operate these hotels. So I just wanted to stress that. I wanted to stress what the hotel and hospitality industry is truly facing. And we urge the committee and council to reject any proposal, not just the head tax, but any proposal that would further discourage new investment in our great city or delay the ability for our hotels to rehire their employees. So thank you for the opportunity and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Mike. Alderman Cardenas, you have a question? Are you there?
Yeah, Chairman, I'm here. My question is, why are we considering this tax at all? I think given the fact that this is a pandemic year and we have serious unemployment numbers, why would anybody be undertaking this to put on the industries that just spoke? That doesn't make any sense to me. Is this a CFO, Jenny?
Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say that as part of the democratic process, some of the members wanted to hear what the position of the CFO and other, what we put out there for the other industries so that they could comment on it. So what we call part of the democratic process, but the CFO might have a different position on it.
No, I was just not going to echo the same comment actually that the chairman just mentioned, which is we've heard this idea come up in a number of different conversations and want to make sure that we are having a full and robust discussion around all the ideas that have been raised.
Got it. I mean, but the conversation was, I know last year there was a conversation, but this year, even with this pandemic, people were thinking the head tax is a good idea. I don't know, just question. Got it.
People have different ideas about different revenue streams, just like the, lease transaction tax or the other ones that were on the table. So to be fair, we wanted to make sure that we heard positions on each one of those. That's all it is.
I do understand it, and I respect obviously other people's opinions, and I disagree with them 150%. Obviously, this is just a bad idea. Thank you.
Yep, you only need 100%. So, thanks, George. Alderman Moore.
If CFO, I don't know if you could provide through the chair or not. And I agree that during this pandemic, it's a challenge, but I still want to know because I'm hearing some of the arguments. If there's any data out there, both when we had the head tax versus also when we didn't have the head tax, okay, let me start this way. When we didn't have the head tax, what percentage increase was there in businesses in Chicago? And where? And when I say where, both industries, whether it's hotel, restaurant, whatever industry, retail, if there was growth, what percentage growth was there and where? And when we put the head tax in,
did we lose growth? And if we can find that data to say, this is what we lost, or we only grew by X percent, or we didn't grow at all. I think that's very important that we have those comparisons, not so much in this pandemic year, but when we're going forward and discussing this issue, because generally we can talk and say what a head tax does or does not do, but I've never seen any data to support arguments either way.
So we can definitely take a look at what that data looks like for the historical head tax. I can give you a couple points of data, and that may help frame this discussion. When we implemented the head tax in 2011, which was the last full year of the $4 per employee head tax, it generated around $23.5 million in revenues for the city. At the time, there was also concern by a number of the businesses who had to pay the head tax. And even if you don't see it in the precise data of companies that are, say, moving out because of the head tax, we know that of specific examples of companies that, reduce their expansion and hiring in Chicago as a result of it. The Ford assembly plant specifically attributed their decision to not expand in the city of Chicago and hiring within the city of Chicago as a result of the head tax within the city. And so, a couple other examples I would note in Seattle. This is one where they have a long history and attempts at implementing a head tax. They implemented twice. The head tax was repealed twice. And, aside from, some of the other details, which you can, frankly, Google in terms of some of the information related to Seattle, I think what's most interesting and important about that for the city of Chicago is that a number of the suburbs in and around Seattle started offering head tax credits in order to offset the head tax and attract businesses out of the city to the suburbs. And so, it's just something that, especially in this time frame, as Alderman Cardenas mentioned, with COVID and how we have significant unemployment, having a tax on employment just makes it very difficult for us to achieve that, ultimate growth that we're looking for, which is, likely to help us pull us out of this difficult financial circumstance more quickly and painlessly than other types of measures that we're going to have to take.
And I absolutely agree, but I'm asking, and it's give us some time so that when post COVID, 2-3 years from now, if this issue come back up, at least I will have that data. That's going to be very important to me to see. So, I would really like to, provide that through the chair, whether it's a month from now or whatever, as long as I get that data.
Okay.
But I agree that this is not the period to be implementing it. Yeah.
And we'll work on getting you that information, Alderman.
Chairman, if I
Thanks,
could say,
Alderman Moore.
if I could say a word in answer to that, this is Jack Lavin. I think
Please go ahead.
one thing, Alderman, you may not find in some of that data is the site selectors, the consultants that tell companies and review the tax situation. And then every city has a group, like we have World Business Chicago, that says, why should you locate here or there, what city? You won't always be in the room or have that data where somebody says, hey, let's not go to Chicago because they have a disincentive tax to hiring people. It's regressive, and it's a symbolic tax that site selectors and people competing with the city use to say, don't go to Chicago, because it's not just the dollar amount on the head tax. It says to these site selectors, it says to businesses, hey, Chicago has a disincentive to bring people, employees there. So you don't always see it in the numbers. It's in the rooms where real estate people and companies are looking at and evaluating the situation in each and comparing each city. So this is a symbolic tax that has a much greater impact with that symbolism. I call it the sledgehammer, because people use this as a reason not to come to Chicago. And it may not be the biggest tax, but it's the ones that's used. And Jenny, the budget directors, Jenny said, Ford. Ford has all these plants all over the country, and every 5 years they make a selection on which plant they're going to close. By repealing this, we help keep the Chicago plant open. But that could change a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. And whenever they make those decisions every 5 years, they retool the plant, spend billions of dollars that puts union workers to work, building construction and workers to work, and keeps the auto workers there, and keeps all the multiplier effects of having a manufacturing plant like that with thousands of jobs in Chicago. So I would just say, and that's, we've already talked about COVID. I'm not sure either historically because of COVID. Now people are making all kinds of different decisions on where they're going to locate their employees, and do they need to locate them in an office or in a location, or can they have them work from home? And all these factors are going to make some historical statistics not as relevant on a tax like this.
I agree with you if I was just asking for one set of data, but that's why I wanted a comparison from when we had the head tax versus when we didn't, because you will see that in the data when you do a comparison. If I was unilaterally just asking for it, then you're right, you would not see that. But in the years that we didn't have a head tax, you should see, to your argument, an increase, and then at least some type of decrease in the years that we had the head tax. So I get what you're saying. Thank you.
Alderman,
Thank you, Alderman Moore.
To echo that point that Jack made, he reminded me that we have been named site selection #1 in the country for Site Selection Magazine for 7 years in a row, I believe it is now, which is really since 2013. So, not a coincidence, I would argue that, upon the repealing of the head tax, that's been, a moniker that we've been able to claim as it relates to our ability to attract corporate businesses. But we will work on that data that you asked for, so we can, take a look at more specific numbers around that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alderman Moore. Budget Chair Pat Dowell, are you there?
Hi, thank you, Chairman. Jenny, the world of business has changed dramatically in the last 10 years or so. We have a lot of technology companies, a lot of companies that function online. And I'm wondering, are we getting the most from these businesses? I mean, could we be getting more? Are we leaving anything on the table here? And are there other cities that have figured out creative ways to mine these burgeoning and growing online companies with their presence?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chairman Dowell. I think that's a great question that we have taken time to look at. And the way I would start off by responding to that question is to say, we have done a thorough look of all of our different revenue streams as it relates to the tax burden that we are applying, both by way of the city of Chicago, as well as how we compare to other cities, because it is a lot about competitiveness and ensuring that we can attract businesses to Chicago, both nationally as well as in the region and our suburban counterparts. And then also importantly, what is it that we can do ourselves by way of taxes? I would argue that there are probably taxes where you could make a case for better equity, better tax policy that we could be taking a look at, that we may not be doing as much as other cities. But importantly, there are taxes that we don't have home rule authority over, would likely require state legislation, or alternatively would need some sort of intersection between us and the state. And so it's a broader point that I think we need to tackle. And I know on Friday we're going to speak to some of those taxes as well. But as it relates to home rule taxes, I struggle to find additional taxes that we can place upon our businesses. We do have one of the highest hotel taxes in the country. We have one of the highest parking taxes in the country. We recently just raised the restaurant taxes, and all of these are industries that are suffering now. And so, it's not to say that we aren't taking a look at every single one of our revenue sources, and we'll continue to do so in terms of what's fair and how we can apply equity to the tax policy there. And we'll continue to, engage in that conversation over the course of the next month or so.
Mr. Chairman, can I add briefly to that?
Thank you very much.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Carr.
Thank you. Just briefly, because I think it speaks to it. IRMA pushed through the Assembly last year the Leveling the Playing Field Act, which had, it turned out to be very fortuitous. But what that does is you are now collecting use tax on every marketplace, every online transaction from remote sellers, no differently than if they had purchased it in the city of Chicago. And beginning January 1, you will start to collect and receive their full retail occupation tax, which is the sales tax. Those are significant revenues that are going to accrue, are already accruing, but are going to accrue to the city of Chicago going forward, that IRMA helped push through the Assembly. Frankly, it took us almost 10 years, but we got it through. So I think that helps give a little broader view to the Alderwoman's question about what you can do. That has largely been done, at least when it comes to online sellers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Carr and Ms. Bennett, do you have a sense of what that might generate for a full calendar year for the city of Chicago? Taking a guess.
Yeah, great question. This is Rob Carr, not off the cuff, but let us look back on our notes that we utilized when we were talking to the Assembly and figure that out. And perhaps I can work with Jenny and figure that out as well.
Sure. And as it relates to our sales tax revenues, that's where it is that we would track the online sales. And I thank Mr. Carr for mentioning the online sales tax. We don't track specifically certain, components of it, but we are tracking the numbers as it relates to what we've seen in how those sales tax revenues have adjusted since the passage of the tax. I don't have a specific number for you at this point because we're working to try to, track exactly how much of it is the change in the behavior as well as what will eventually be the equalizing of the online rate in January. We have taken into account overall sales and consumer spend and what we've seen in that respect in the city of Chicago, and how it is that you build that into an econometric model, which then ultimately informs what the trending of that revenue should be at a very high level. Online sales tax obviously is a very big part of where we think there's going to be growth going forward, because if my household is any indication, we're doing a lot more purchasing online. But the specific, tracking of the ins and outs, we need a few more months to really be able to get to precisely how much of it is due to, better enforcement, how much of it is due to COVID and the response to COVID, and parsing that out.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome, Chairwoman Dell. Alderman Vasquez, you there?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm sorry that I couldn't jump on sooner. I had a couple meetings, but I had heard some, and I had a question after Mr. Levin's comment about how some businesses, right, you couldn't see on paper if a business is not going to move somewhere, right? That's not a data point. But along those lines, is there any collected data about cities that have done it and haven't, to compare those results and compare the cities that have over time as well? Like, are there any comparable data points that one could look at to extrapolate more information on that?
So we've taken a look at the head tax in a number of different cities. And I think the only example of a city where you've seen the head tax, meaningfully persist is in Colorado, where in essence you have not just the city of Denver, but also its surrounding suburbs have implemented a similar tax. So there isn't the competitive dynamics that we would see here in the city of Chicago. And so, if and the perfect example of that is another town which implemented the head tax. And then ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, had their regional suburbs offer head tax credits in order to lure businesses away from the city of Seattle. Right. And so I think that aside from the specifics of the policy, I would just also add the additional layer that now it's just about the worst time for us to be considering the head tax because of its impact on employment and the 12% unemployment we've seen more broadly, and in particular because the head tax negatively impacts largely employers who hire more employees and generally speaking are lower income employees. It has a regressive nature to it.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I think especially in the moment, right, when we're seeing all the businesses closing, like I do have those concerns. I think for me, in order to, right, if this was a year ago, I think I'd have a different decision on it, the way kind of I'm weighing it out. So I think I would love to see the data, if there is any that can be provided to the chair, if there's anything comparable, even in the cities you mentioned, just to kind of take a look at. On a different line of questioning, so I think about the industries that I think have kind of seen an increase in productivity, so to speak. And what stands out to me, that we had written a resolution asking for the state in regards to, and I know that the chairman also had written legislation as far as the Grubhub and food delivery services. So has there been any discussion about revisiting that, knowing that, right, the deliveries and that stuff continues, Grubhub, all these other companies are making those funds, and the ability for us to be able to tax that because there is activity there that's not being seen in other industries?
Are you talking about food delivery services specifically or more broadly than that?
It was more specifically that, because I remember that's kind of what we were focused on initially, was like the food delivery specifically, right? Everyone's ordering more as opposed to what they did before.
Mhm.
So there is activity there to potentially put a tax on.
Mhm. We could take a look at it. I would argue that the food delivery services are also supporting a restaurant industry that is suffering. And so, the one, small bright light that the restaurants are facing currently as it relates to activity. And I don't know if Sam's still on and would want to speak to that.
I am. Thank you, Alderman, for that question. Obviously, we know that other cities, this is not the head tax, it's a different, on that third-party delivery, the Ubers and Grubhubs of the world. We've seen other cities put a cap on how much they can charge restaurants as we go into the fall and winter seasons. I think we should come back and visit that, because they still charge up to 30%. Let me repeat myself, up to 30% of the sales that go to a restaurant goes to these third-party deliveries. So I know this is not what we're here to talk about, but
Super quick, would you define that as support?
I would not define that as support. That's
Okay,
why I think we need to go back and visit that, especially as we go into the fall and winter months, and they will be picking up more business. So
Yeah, like I think when we're looking at, society's changed, as has our behavior because of this. So we're seeing that they're able to capitalize off of that moment. And I think in talking to the local businesses and restaurants that are always being squeezed out and they're getting smaller and smaller, that's what they're telling us and had told us before. And I do think this is something to explore, because similarly to the way we were looking at rideshare last year, and now we're seeing the difference because those behaviors have changed. This is something that's picked up that I think it's revenue for the city that would be left on the table if we didn't explore it fully.
Yeah, again, I think we should go back and explore this, Alderman. You and the chairman were our leaders on this, and I don't think we finished our business there. But again, this is about the head tax, not the third-party delivery. But thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, so for the chair, if you could provide any data on the head tax, that would be my only asking. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Vasquez. Alderman Hopkins, your hand's up.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'll be quick. I'm not going to reiterate the numerous arguments against this head tax. And I know many of the aldermen were involved in the fight to eliminate it for a number of years. I'm assuming their position has not changed. Mine certainly hasn't. What has changed, and I just want to point this out. Last year at this time, on a Monday in September, 300,000 people would get off of a metro train a week.
Alderman Hopkins, I don't know if it's me or I think we might be losing your
somewhere
audio there.
In the city of Chicago. Currently, jobs. I can't think of a more dramatic and continuous grip that we have and as a center for jobs. So the head tax, as has been repeatedly stated, is a job killer at a time when we need the opposite. And to Alderman Cardenas's point that, we've had this argument before, we're going to have to keep having it because there's a divergence of opinions on the city council, and we're going to have to keep reminding some of our colleagues what a terrible mistake it would be and how counterproductive and hurtful it would be to the economy to reinstate this head tax. So I'm a hard no on this. And as I said, I'm sure most of the aldermen who fought so hard to eliminate it remain in their positions as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to air out the rationale once again.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. And Alderman Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to beat the dead horse. We removed the head tax because it was killing us business-wise. The minute we took it off the table, you could see companies and businesses come back to the city of Chicago. And as a person who was there through the whole process, through the whole fight of eliminating the head tax, it is a devastating, restrictive tax on businesses, and they will not walk but run out of the city of Chicago. So I'm begging my colleagues to think about how much of a problem all our businesses are having right now. I'm telling you, this will put the nail in the coffin. And if you think we're a desert now, we'll be sand. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Okay, I don't see any other hands up there. Mr. Bauer, I had a question from a long time ago, a couple eons ago, but it was about that rebate for New York City. It goes all the way back to the LaSalle Street tax. And before we wrap up, I just wondered if you had that answer I was looking for about what action had to be taken to do the rebate.
Sure. So first of all, it is a state financial transaction tax. Of course, most of the activity is levied in New York City. In 1981, and this had been in place since 1901 or 1902. And in 1981, the industry lobbied successfully for the state to repeal the tax, but they didn't repeal the tax because it was tied as a revenue stream to some of its bond covenants. So what they offered them was a 100% rebate. After the tax is paid, the rebate is applied for and they get all the money back. But that allows the state to maintain the tax for purpose of its bond covenants. And it is still on the books. And so some of what is happening in New York State right now are some members of the assembly are suggesting that they should resurrect it. That has not gotten traction yet. I think it has the same issues as what's occurring in New Jersey.
But it's a state level issue.
Yes, although
or a state decision.
Oh yeah, all the activity is in New York City. I mean,
yep.
the vast majority of it is, but it is, and in that instance, that it may be part of why they decided to locate a fair amount of their electronic activity in New Jersey. Some is redundancy, but some also may be that they just were kind of hedging their bets too.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks for holding on to that question for a while, or that answer. I'm sorry. Okay. Before I close up, I'd like CFO Bennett to say a couple words before we roll off here.
Sure. I mostly wanted to end by saying that I'm glad that we were able to have this conversation. To the point that the chairman made, we want to make sure we're having a thorough, robust conversation around all of the revenue streams of the city. We have another discussion on Friday that's planned. And so to the extent that any of the aldermen have ideas, would love to hear about other revenue sources that they'd like to discuss. And mostly that, this is going to be a collaborative process. It's going to be a difficult process, and we want to make sure we're dialoguing with you on a number of ideas. And hopefully we'll come out with what is the best budget we can put together given the circumstances. But thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. And we will have another thorough discussion on Friday. And if we can't finish the ideas that you bring forward, and I know a lot of you have sent some via email or letters, but we will continue to make sure those are put on the table, and there's some really good ideas out there. And I want to thank all of our panelists today. I know a few of them had to drop off, and I know many of you stayed on for the entire meeting, which I think we all really appreciate, because I think this is if I can remember, one of the first times we've been able to have a meeting like this a month in advance of a mayor's budget speech. So getting these ideas out there, vetting them, good or bad. It's part of the democratic process, and I really appreciate all of you providing this input and really letting us know what the industry's position are on each one of these topics, because I know each of you play an integral part of the way the city operates, and we want to keep it that way. So thank you all again for doing that. And individual aldermen, if you have questions, I'm sure they will reach out to you or vice versa about each of these ideas. So thank you everyone for coming on. Alderman Thompson.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hey, thanks, Chair. You'll just circulate all the opening remarks that you had said earlier.
Yes, if I have any, correct, if I have any statements that people are providing, we will circulate them to everyone, and we'll circle back with them to see if they also have any supporting evidence about what they talked about, whether it's everything from the impact of the head tax on each one of the industries, going back to the issues with the LaSalle Street tax and the numbers that we saw there. So I will try to get that to everybody as they provide it to us. And again, thank you everybody for coming on. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn by Alderman David Moore. And thank you so much, CFO Bennett.
All those in favor?
Very transparent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All those in favor of
you.
motion to adjourn, say aye.
Thank you, Chairman.
All right. All those opposed?
All right, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.